I'm your bedtime historian, and it's funny how the most powerful families in medieval Europe were terrified of outsiders, yet utterly blind to the strangers living inside their own veins. Imagine velvet-draped halls echoing with the soft shuffle of royal slippers hallways, where whispered deals arranged marriages like chess pieces, sliding cousins, uncles, and nieces across kingdoms with a single vow. It's a hush that lives on long after the candles have flickered out. So, what secrets did these arranged royal unions really protect? And what curses did they quietly pass on behind gilded doors? If you're the sort who finds this bedtime intrigue oddly comforting, a little thumbs up and a quiet subscribe might just keep these ancient corridors echoing. Sometimes I wonder if you could pick any royal ghost to have tea with. Whose secrets would you want to hear first? Now settle your pillow. Feel the hush of centuries gathering around you, and step softly into the first dim corridor where royal marriages begin. In the cold glow of torchlight, you see a girl no older than 13, her hair pinned tight beneath a pearl-studded veil. She's not a bride by choice, she's a bridge. A living bond between two realms desperate to bind themselves tighter than any parchment treaty ever could. You watch the court applaud as the vows are spoken in Latin none of them truly understand. For the crowned heads of Europe, marriage was less about love than about land heirs and the delicate dance of bloodlines that were never meant to wander too far from home. One royal fact stands out like a diamond in a coal mine in the Middle Ages. Nearly every major European house, from the Plantagenets to the Valois, signed marriage contracts that locked cousins, second cousins, even siblings into tangled knots. The goal? Keep the power circle small enough to trust yet broad enough to ward off rebellion from ambitious nobles sniffing around the throne. It's a strange logic when you think about it. The same alliances meant to keep kingdoms safe often sowed the seeds of future collapses. A young prince, betrothed at 6, might never see his promised bride until his beard came in. A princess barely out of her cradle promised to a boy with her uncle's nose and her mother's chin family likenesses that were more than skin deep. Some historians still debate whether these dynastic unions were acts of political brilliance or reckless rolls of the genetic dice. After all, royal advisors knew the risks. The church even issued warnings, now and then mostly ignored, when a convenient cousin could secure a border. Picture the great feasts that followed these unions. Gilded goblets, clinking venison and sweetmeats passed hand to hand, and under it all quiet murmurs of who might marry whom next. To the common folk outside castle walls, royal weddings meant days off work, free bread, or maybe a glimpse of a jeweled carriage rattling over muddy lanes. To the nobles seated at high tables, they meant another lock on the door, another name stitched onto family banners. In this candlelit hush, secrets swirl. The bride, draped in heavy silk, lowers her gaze to the polished floor. Somewhere deep inside her father's keep, monks draft papal permissions to wed cousins 3 times removed, because heaven must nod before the veil lifts. If you lean close, you might catch the sour scent of fear. Fear that marrying outside the clan might invite betrayal, or worse, dilute the sacred royal blood said to be touched by God himself. Some scholars argue this divine excuse was a convenient mask for an age-old truth power loves to keep its secrets in the family. And so generation after generation, Europe's courts spun their webs. Matchmakers scribbled genealogies by candlelight. Bishops and kings traded nieces and nephews like costly trinkets. The peasantry watched from afar, never knowing that in these gilded bedrooms, Entire continents' fates were being quietly shaped, one cousin's kiss at a time. Tonight you stand in that long, drafty corridor, with me feeling the stone floor cool beneath your bare feet. Somewhere ahead, another bride waits, veil trembling, as her father seals the door behind her. There's no turning back now. The royal line must endure pure unbroken, and as you'll soon see, deeply cursed by its own desperate need to stay the same. A faint chill brushes your skin as you drift deeper into these candlelit halls, toward a door few dared open wide, the forbidden union of uncle and niece. In the flicker of torchlight, you catch the hushed rumor that in royal chambers, love and law were often strangers, politely nodding as they passed each other by. The court gossip is never written in the scrolls, but you can almost hear it now, whispered prayers that no one would look too closely at the family tree's twisted branches. Among Europe's crowned heads, uncle-niece marriages were more common than most would care to admit. In the late Middle Ages, kings and queens bent holy rules to stitch bloodlines together in ways that made even the Pope squirm. Spain's Habsburgs, the Bourbons of France, and the early Austrian archdukes all tucked these quiet arrangements behind silk curtains and iron gates. One well-documented fact, King Philip II of Spain married his own niece, Anna of Austria, in 1570. He was 44. She was 20. Their union was less about passion than insurance, a fresh air to solidify a crumbling line new blood from the same old pool. The wedding portraits show a stern man in black velvet and a pale bride who looks far too much like his sister. What's curious, and what some historians still puzzle over, is how these unions were not only allowed but publicly celebrated. Chroniclers painted them as noble sacrifices. Courtiers praised the couple's divine duty to keep God's chosen blood pure. Never mind the whisper that behind the altar waited a physician, a priest, and a worried midwife. Imagine the wedding feast roasted peacock's wine that never ran dry, musicians plucking lutes under frescoed ceilings. Guests toasted the king's loyalty to his house, a toast that tasted sweet only if you didn't think too hard about the bride's family resemblance. A soft rumor slips through these old stones. Some scribes believe these marriages weren't always forced. Power brings strange choices, and some royal nieces found ambition in those vows. To be queen, even if your husband was also your uncle, meant silk gowns, private gardens, and the right to whisper orders that made armies march. Still surviving letters tell a different side. A cousin's confession here, a hidden diary there, hints that not every bride was eager. Some scholars still argue whether these girls dreamed of escape or simply accepted that their fate was draped in ermine and regret. Take a step closer to that carved oak door. Behind it, an uncle lifts his niece's veil, careful not to crush the delicate lace that cost a village's taxes for the year. The hush in the room says it all. No one dares speak the word that trembles behind every vow incest. Not when a crown is at stake. The church officially forbade such close unions, citing Leviticus and the moral order of Christendom. Yet loopholes abounded for the rich. A king's ambassador might slip gold to a bishop. A cardinal might scribble out a quick dispensation. And the Pope himself, facing political storms, might sign a parchment that made bloodlines bend to royal will. You stand in the shadows as the priest's voice echoes what God has joined together. But you wonder, did God ever really nod at all? Or did the whisper of gold coins on cathedral floors speak louder than Scripture? Historians keep debating the true scale of these alliances. Some say records were burned on purpose that countless unions never made the official rolls. Others believe the ones we know are but a fraction a peek into a wider practice hidden by time and carefully edited family portraits. Listen closely to the court gossip. Maids hush their giggles when they sweep the corridor. A page boy shivers as he carries a message from the bride's mother, who is also the king's sister. These walls have heard it all and will never tell. As you drift from this room, the scent of beeswax and rosewater lingers. Somewhere in the distance, a royal bed is prepared. The uncle, the niece, the seal of power, pressed into flesh and parchment alike. And with each generation, the blood thickens like ink in an old ledger, scratched out only when it's too late to undo what's been done. Step softly. The next corridor opens to more than marriage contracts. It reveals the peculiar logic that crowned heads clung to long after sense had fled the hall. A faint draft curls along the stone corridor as you pass from scandalous vows to the strange idea that held them all together, blue blood logic. This belief seeped into royal minds like wine into linen. Kings and queens swore that their veins carried something sacred, a divine spark that lifted them above the common crowds who toiled in fields and bowed at cathedral doors. To them, marrying inside the family tree wasn't folly, it was a holy insurance policy to keep that spark from flickering out. One stubborn fact roots this idea in every history book for centuries. European monarchs claimed their authority was not granted by human law, but by God Himself. The doctrine of divine right crowned their heads in gold and pressed an invisible halo on every child born to the royal bed. To mix that blood with peasant stock, or even a lesser noble, was to risk smudging the glow that kept rebellion at bay. Picture a medieval hall glittering with stained glass windows. Courtiers whisper of ancient lineages tracing back to legendary kings and half-forgotten saints. The royal genealogist, quill in hand, charts a labyrinth of marriages that loop back on themselves like a serpent devouring its tail. The goal was pure lines, unbroken, undefiled, gleaming blue beneath pale skin. But here's where the logic grows. Curious historians still debate whether this obsession ever truly kept crowns safe. Some scholars argue that tangled pedigrees merely made kingdoms vulnerable in air with a frail body, a sickly complexion, a mind that wandered in shadows. Yet the royal courts clung to their scrolls and seals convinced that blood alone could anchor thrones. A lesser-known detail floats through the hush of these corridors. In some courts, brides were examined for purity, not just in body, but in blood family trees combed for hidden rust, as old records put it. Distant cousins with the right pedigree could claim more power than foreign princesses bearing exotic dowries. It didn't matter if the new duchess spoke a language no one understood. If her veins ran blue enough, the deal was struck. Stand here a moment. Listen to the chatter of scribes as they argue over ancient scrolls. Some question whether blue blood ever truly existed, pointing out that the phrase comes not from royal veins, but from pale skin that revealed dark veins beneath. Others point to the phrase's Spanish root sangre azul, used by nobles to set themselves apart from those with Moorish or Jewish heritage. So much for divine sparks, some suspect it was simply snobbery dressed up as holiness. You move past oil paintings of kings with half-lidded eyes and queens with high foreheads and folded hands. You notice how many look eerily alike brows, drawn the same chin sharp or soft in matching ways. The portraits stand as silent proof that the logic of pure blood created something else entirely, a mirror echo from one generation to the next. At court feasts, the blue blood theory was served alongside roast swan and honeyed wine. Nobles toasted each other's pedigrees like rare vintages. An offhand jest about a bastard child could ruin a man. A rumor of mixed blood could spark a duel at dawn. Yet behind all this polished ritual lurked a fear they would never name aloud, that the same purity they praised might doom them from within. Some records even hint that midwives were instructed to keep quiet when a royal child showed signs of weakness at birth, twisted limbs, strange facial features, a mind that never quite cleared the fog of the cradle. To speak these truths too loudly risked shattering the myth that a king's power was untouchable. Still, the idea endured, carried like a candle through dark halls and flickering bedchambers. A fragile flame, yet one they trusted more than treaties or armies. To keep that flame burning, uncles married, nieces, cousins, wed cousins, and the circle of pure bloodlines tightened until it nearly choked itself. Step carefully now. The cold stones beneath your feet have borne witness to vows spoken under cathedral arches, papal scrolls inked in secret, and the quiet hush of nurses tending fragile heirs. Ahead lies a case study so tangled it became legend, the Spanish branch of this blue blood labyrinth. If you thought the idea of purity was strange, wait until you peer into a family tree that loops so tightly it threatens to vanish into itself. The air grows thicker now as you slip into the Spanish wing of this sprawling, creaking dynasty, a place where blue blood logic bloomed into a labyrinth of flesh and parchment, the House of Habsburg. This is the branch historians whisper about most when they speak of royal inbreeding, because nowhere did the roots twist tighter than in Spain's royal court. The Habsburgs' fierce defenders of Catholic power believed they were God's chosen gardeners of Europe, pruning family lines to keep the same sacred sap flowing through every royal heart. Here's one fact that can't be denied by the 16th century. The Habsburg family tree looked less like an oak and more like a wreath, loops within loops, uncles marrying nieces, cousins betrothed before they could read the vows. Some branches were so tangled that a single child might trace both parents back to the same grandparent twice over. Step into a candlelit chamber in Madrid's Royal Alcazar. On a velvet cushion sits a young prince, his chin already hinting at the telltale jut that would earn its own grim nickname, the Habsburg jaw. Servants bustle around him, tailors, scribes, a priest, murmuring prayers to protect a boy whose blood carries too much of the same story. One historical truth that never fails to raise an eyebrow. Charles II of Spain, the last of his line, was so profoundly affected by generations of close kin unions that he couldn't speak, clearly struggled to chew, and had no heirs to extend his fragile line. His jaw jutted forward like a misplaced cliff, a feature that became both a physical marker and a grim symbol of royal obsession gone too far. Some scholars still argue over how much blame to place on the family tree. Was Charles simply unlucky, or did the decades of uncle-niece vows doom him from birth? Surviving court records hint that the king's physicians knew the truth, but cloaked it in polite Latin diagnoses that danced around words like degeneration and heredity. A lesser-known detail Charles's reign was filled with exorcisms. Priests were summoned to banish demons when the real demon was scribbled in his lineage. His mother, Mariana of Austria, was not just his parent, but also his father's niece, making Charles the product of more than 2 centuries of looping bloodlines. Picture the Habsburg court at supper. A banquet of quail almonds and candied figs. Diplomats sip sweet wine, pretending not to notice that the king's head droops as a servant wipes his chin. Whispers dart between goblets If Charles cannot rule, who will? Who dares break this sacred circle to save Spain from itself? The Habsburgs' tangled tree didn't grow in isolation. Marriages to maintain pure Catholic blood tied them to Austria, Burgundy, and the Holy Roman Empire. Ambassadors carried painted portraits across mountains. Brides chosen not for wit or beauty, but for the right shade of hair, and the precise angle of a nose that matched a cousin's chin. Historians keep digging into dusty ledgers, hoping to map every knot and twist. Some believe there are missing branches, lost children, secret unions, dead infants, whose graves were never marked, all hidden to protect the image of divine perfection. Stand here a moment longer. Feel the hush inside the stone chapel, where Charles II knelt to pray for heirs that would never come. The echo of those prayers still lingers, a ghostly reminder that blood alone cannot bind a kingdom forever. Not all nobles were blind to the curse. A few dared to argue for fresh blood alliances with distant princesses or minor nobles untainted by the same looping lines. But every attempt sparked fear. A foreign bride might bring foreign claims, foreign wars, or worse, foreign heirs who might set the whole fragile chessboard on fire. So the Habsburgs clung to their looping branches until the tree cracked under its own weight. The last leaves fell in Madrid's royal nursery, where nurses rocked empty cradles and wondered what prayers could do that marriage contracts never could. Tonight, you leave this Spanish chamber behind, stepping out through an archway, heavy with carved saints and royal seals. Ahead lies the silent proof of what these tangled branches left behind, faces etched with the secrets of the blood they carried generation after generation. Step softly now, deeper into painted halls, where portraits watch you pass, faces frozen in oil, telling tales of secrets whispered through bone and blood. These royal features didn't just appear. They carried family crests, etched in flesh. Welcome to the chapter where faces tell tales more honestly than any court historian ever dared. It's impossible to speak of Europe's tangled royal blood without pausing at a mirror, one that reflects the so-called Habsburg jaw, a jutting chin, and swollen lower lip that grew more pronounced with every generation. This single stubborn trait became the face of inbreeding's quiet cost. Look closely at portraits of Charles II Philip IV or Charles II kings, whose jawlines almost seem to march ahead of their foreheads. One undeniable fact: modern researchers have traced the Habsburg jaw, known to science as mandibular prognathism, directly to the family's long habit of marrying close kin. A 2019 genetic study even linked the trait's severity to how many shared ancestors a monarch had. The more tangled the tree, the longer the chin, but scholars still debate whether the portraits exaggerate for drama's sake. Some argue court painters eager to flatter softened the worst of these features. Others believe the brush did the opposite, turning a physical imperfection into a quiet political warning that blood too tightly bound could betray the body it claimed to protect. Peer beyond the famous jaw, and you'll see other marks that came to define royal lines: the Bourbon nose, the narrow Habsburg eyes, the Austrian droop of a lower lip, subtle signs that courtiers watched for, whispered about, and quietly measured when arranging marriages. A princess's face could spell the future of a throne. One eyebrow too thick, a jaw too wide, and the matchmaker's pen hovered uncertain. A lesser-known detail, often buried in footnotes: European courts sometimes hired traveling physicians to study heirs and record any sign of physical weakness or unfavorable features. These secret reports shaped entire kingdoms. One Spanish envoy in the 17th century famously described an Austrian princess as of good stock, but with a worrying tendency toward the heavy jaw code for caution in sealing any vows. You can almost hear the whispers behind closed tapestries. A lady in waiting remarks that the prince's mouth never quite closes. A physician murmurs that the princess's lisp might worsen with age. In corridors lined with gilt-framed ancestors, these features became living proof of blue blood's hidden cracks. Some historians still puzzle over how these traits turned into royal identity. Did the rulers flaunt their jutting jaws as proof of divine right? Or did they hide behind lace ruffs and heavy beards, masking what their blood could not stand before an old portrait? The velvet robe, the golden chain, the eyes half closed, as if already drifting into history's sleep. Notice how often the faces repeat themselves. A king looks like his uncle, his cousin, his grandfather twice over. This echo was no accident. It was the quiet price paid to keep kingdoms in the family. At feasts, jesters sometimes dared to joke about the resemblance. One Spanish fool supposedly quipped that his king's chin arrived before the rest of him. The joke was short-lived fools who mocked the family face did not last long at court. Yet the truth lingered, hidden in the tapestries, the crown passed down, not just wealth and land, but an uneasy inheritance written on each royal brow. And beyond the palaces, common folk knew the face too. Coins minted with royal profiles spread the family likeness across continents, each silver piece a tiny portrait that carried the jaw to markets and taverns far from the velvet throne rooms. So linger here a moment longer. Look back at those stone busts and oil canvases. The faces are more than portraits. They're living genealogies' delicate lines, where history and heredity meet in quiet defiance of nature's preference for variety. The echo of these jaws and brows leads you onward deeper into the hush behind the castle doors, toward the secrets hidden not in paintings, but in the fragile bodies that bore these faces into the world, sometimes paying dearly for a crown's unbroken line. Slip past the marble busts, and you'll find yourself standing at the edge of another secret one, less visible than a jutting chin, but far more merciless the hidden illnesses that stalk these royal halls, like silent courtiers of their own. Welcome to the hush of a queen's secret illness. Picture a royal bedchamber, heavy with embroidered curtains, thick enough to keep out cold drafts and curious eyes. In that guarded twilight, a pale queen lies propped against velvet pillows, her ladies fanning her flushed face, whispering prayers that never quite hush the truth. Behind the gilded doors, her illness is both a family shame and a political threat, one that must never seep through the stone walls. One undeniable fact: inbred bloodlines didn't just produce strong chins and hooked noses. They also passed down hereditary diseases, some subtle, others catastrophic. The Habsburgs are notorious for this, but they weren't alone. Across Europe, hidden within castle nurseries and curtained sick rooms, queens suffered from hemophilia, epilepsy, and a string of genetic disorders that polite court gossip called delicate health. A lesser-known detail flickers in the letters of physicians behind every royal marriage contract was often a quiet clause. Midwives sworn to silence doctors, bribed with gold to say a queen's fevers were just nervous vapors. After all, an heir's legitimacy depended not just on royal blood, but on the mother's ability to survive childbirth again and again if needed. You can almost smell the sharp tang of herbal tonics brewed in secret still rooms. Lavender sage, bitter wormwood, brewed and whispered over by court apothecaries who claimed they could cure what even prayers could not. Some queens swallowed ground pearls, believing crushed jewels could mend the flaws that centuries of cousin marriages etched deep in their bones. Historians still argue over just how much was known and how much was guessed. Surviving diaries tell half-truths, a queen weak of heart, a princess too frail for the hunt. Behind these soft words lurked reality joints that swelled and locked blood, that refused to clot wombs, that failed again and again to cradle a future king. Step closer to the foot of that guarded bed. The courtiers wait outside, eyes downcast, as the royal confessor murmurs final prayers for an heir that will never cry in the nursery next door. Sometimes the king stands beside the bed stone-faced, knowing that his bride's illness is his own family's doing, a secret poison, hidden in blood, sealed in vows made under cathedral arches. Some queens became shadows before their time, pale ghosts drifting through palace gardens, wrapped in heavy cloaks, even in summer. Their portraits painted to hang beside healthy husbands and robust heirs show none of the truth. The hollow eyes, the trembling hands, the brittle bones that betrayed centuries of royal hope. One soft rumor weaves through court letters. Some royal mothers begged the Pope himself to bless their children's bodies, believing divine grace could outwit faulty genes. But no blessing could erase the whispers that slipped through castle corridors at night, servants who glimpsed the queen's bandaged arms, wet nurses who carried away stillborn heirs. The strangest irony, even as these queens wasted away their sickness, was painted as strength. A suffering queen inspired pity, pity that could be turned into loyalty or even superstition. Stories spread that their pain was a sign of holiness, a burden that proved their divine link. A frail queen, they said, was proof that royal blood was special, too rare, too fine to thrive like common veins. And so the myth endured: pale queens behind velvet drapes, pale heirs behind nursery doors, pale promises inked on marriage contracts that pretended the next generation would be stronger. In truth, the next generation often arrived just as fragile, if they arrived at all. Linger here in this hush. Imagine the click of a court doctor's box opening in the dark, a bottle of tincture, a scrap of holy relic tucked beneath a pillow. No one outside these walls would ever know the truth behind the queen's smile at court, the forced laughter at feasts. Her weakness was her secret, and her secret was her family's legacy, a legacy you're about to trace through the odd cures and half-magic that royal physicians conjured to treat what could never truly be healed. Follow the faint scent of rosemary and camphor as you leave the queen's dim chamber and drift into the cluttered warmth of a medieval apothecary, where hope was bottled in tiny vials and medicinal myths wrapped royal ailments in layers of superstition. Here, whispered cures for cursed bloodlines found fertile ground. In these shadowy corners of the castle, apothecaries and court physicians mixed potions that claimed to mend what centuries of close-kin vows had quietly broken. Shelves groaned under earthen jars of powdered antler, dried rose hips, and slices of bezoar stones prized as a charm against unseen poisons. The royal sick rooms were laboratories of faith as much as medicine. One hard fact that survives in yellowed ledgers: European courts spent fortunes on so-called miracle cures. The Habsburgs alone kept entire staffs of herbalists, astrologers, and self-proclaimed healers who promised to strengthen fragile heirs and restore ailing queens. They ground pearls into dust, stirred in unicorn horn powder, though the horn was usually narwhal tusk from traders who understood royal desperation all too well. Some scholars still debate how many of these cures were deliberate fraud and how many were honest hope. After all, medieval medicine was more guesswork than science. A healer might bleed a king for bad humors, or apply leeches behind a princess's ears to draw out the sickness of the blood. If the child survived, the cure worked. If not, it was God's will or the devil's mischief. Step closer to a work table stained with wax drips and ink smudges. A court physician scribbles new recipes by candlelight foxglove for a swelling heart mercury for a cough that won't leave. The irony is bitter. Many royal patients suffered more from the cure than the disease. Mercury, that shimmering promise, poisoned more princes than it saved. A lesser-known detail, some queens trusted secret midwives and hedge witches more than the court's official doctors. Disguised in dark cloaks, these women slipped into palace kitchens to brew bone broth laced with wild herbs. The church disapproved of sage-rue mugwort plants that might steady a womb or ease a royal fever in ways no gilded tincture could. Meanwhile, the church itself walked a crooked line. Officially, it banned folk remedies and superstitious brews. Unofficially, bishops turned a blind eye if the herbs kept an heir alive long enough to secure alliances. Some monastery gardens quietly grew the very plants they condemned, their secret beds hidden behind stone cloisters. Picture a scene often lost to polished history. A young prince coughing through winter nights, his nurse sprinkling holy water on his brow, while a court alchemist pours a spoonful of syrup said to calm the humors. Nearby, a mother clutches a saint's relic to her chest, praying the bone fragment might do what boiled nettles could not. Historians still argue whether any of this truly helped. Surviving medical books suggest a handful of remedies did ease suffering: honey for infections, wine infused with garlic for wounds, poppy milk for sleep. But for royal bloodlines tangled by generations of same blood vows, there was no potion strong enough to untie the knots hidden inside tiny veins. Imagine, too, the gossip that brewed alongside the potions. Servants muttering about potions gone wrong, princes who bled too freely, queens who never rose from childbed. Yet to speak too loudly was treason. Better to smile at the next feast, to raise a goblet to a frail heir's improving constitution, and hope the herbal tonics worked their quiet magic. Sometimes the cures themselves became legend. A Spanish king was rumored to keep a bezoar stone under his pillow to ward off bad humors. A French princess bathed in milk mixed with crushed emeralds to strengthen her humors and soften a jaw that jutted a little too proudly. Stand here amid shelves of dried roots and brittle parchment. The flicker of a candle throws your shadow across dusty jars, labeled in Latin, hope and desperation in equal measure. There's something haunting in the hush, a truth that no pearl powder or unicorn dust could fix what royal blood carried from cradle to grave. As you leave this cramped chamber behind, the door creaks on old hinges, and the scent of herbs gives way to the faint echo of church bells, a reminder that above these smoky still rooms, another power watched over the kingdom's tangled beds and whispered cures. Step out of the apothecary's hush and into the echo of cathedral bells, where stone spires touch the clouds and incense drifts through vaulted arches. Here, under painted saints and flickering candles, the church turned its mighty gaze, or politely looked away, when royal bloodlines twisted too close for comfort. In medieval Europe, faith and power walked hand in hand. Kings claimed divine right, and popes crowned them in God's name. But when uncles wed nieces or cousins shared a marriage bed, it was the church's job to uphold the sacred laws that barred such unions. Or, so the parchment said. One undeniable fact, canon law, forbade marriage within the fourth degree of consanguinity, roughly no closer than third cousins. The rule was simple in theory, but slippery in practice. Royal courts flush with gold, and desperate for pure heirs, found ways to bend the rule until it snapped like a dry reed. Imagine the scene inside a bishop's chamber, an anxious ambassador sliding a velvet purse across an oak desk. A papal legate nodding gravely while he tests the gold's weight in his palm. Somewhere in Rome, a clerk sharpens a quill to scribble out a dispensation, a holy permission slip to marry a cousin, an uncle, a niece. And when the ink dries, the sin is sanctified. Historians still argue how many of these dispensations were honest exceptions and how many were quiet bribes. Some say the popes turned a blind eye because royal favors filled Vatican coffers with silver and promises. Others claim the church's tangled moral codes couldn't keep up with the tangled royal trees that funded it. A lesser-known detail flickers in old papal archives. When the Spanish Habsburgs married too close, they often justified it by pointing to their sacred mission to guard Catholic lands against Protestant rivals. In other words, a bit of familial closeness was a small price to pay for the unity of Christendom, at least when that closeness kept Habsburg gold flowing to Rome. Step into the cold hush of a side chapel. You can almost hear a young princess whispering confessions behind an iron grate. Prayers for forgiveness. She knows she'll never speak aloud to her husband, who is also her uncle. Outside the chapel, the same priest who absolves her blesses the wedding feast, where violins play, under banners stitched with family crests that repeat themselves like a looping chant. Some bishops dared to protest. Letters survive from lower clergy warning Rome that these unions risk both moral decay and public scandal. Yet when a king's envoy arrived with sealed orders, the warnings were quietly buried under layers of diplomatic flattery and polite silence. A strange irony drifts through these incense clouds. The same church that thundered against commoners' sins turned curiously quiet when crowns were at stake. Records from the 16th century show papal dispensations granted for marriages so close they shocked even the courtiers forced to attend the ceremonies. And yet, when a baker married his niece in a village chapel, the same church excommunicated him on the spot. Picture a grand cathedral on a wedding day, painted saints looking down as vows echo in Latin. The groom's cloak lined with ermine, the bride's veil heavy with pearls. At the altar, the priest's voice never wavers. God's blessing granted through human compromise binds these two souls and their matching blood. The common folk gathered outside might cheer for the spectacle, but whisper about what grows in a womb sown by such tangled roots. Some scholars still puzzle over whether these dispensations were acts of calculated politics or genuine fear of divine retribution. Did kings truly believe their heirs were protected by papal ink? Or was the ritual merely a mask holy absolution for sins the state could not afford to confess? Step into the nave one last time before you leave this sacred hush behind. The candles gutter in their brass holders. The scent of frankincense drifts into the rafters. Somewhere beyond these walls, the children born of such unions play in palace nurseries, small fragile bodies wrapped in royal silks. Outside, the village bells toll a reminder that while faith may forgive, blood remembers. And when that blood flows too close, no blessing, papal or otherwise, can stop what curls quietly in the family's veins. Now, as the bells fade into the dusk, follow the echo down the stone steps toward the nursery door. For it is there that the true cost of these holy permissions will take its first trembling breath. The hush deepens as you drift down the cold corridor toward a place often hidden behind heavy oak doors, the royal nursery. Here, the consequences of blue blood logic and the church's blind eye wake at dawn, with soft cries and fragile lungs. Here, royal children's fate is sealed long before their first steps echo on marble floors. Picture a long nursery hall in a Spanish palace, whitewashed walls, wooden cradles carved with family crests, nurses in linen caps moving like quiet ghosts between flickering oil lamps. Some of these infants carry the promise of kingdoms on their tiny shoulders. Others carry the quiet mark of a curse centuries in the making. One stubborn fact appears again and again in buried letters and physicians' journals. Infant mortality among Europe's royals was shockingly high. While common folk lost children to plague, famine, or war, the royals often buried heirs whose bloodlines twisted too close, gifting them with bodies too frail to survive beyond childhood. Some historians still argue over just how many fragile heirs never made it into the official portraits that line palace galleries today. Royal scribes polished the family tree, pruning away branches that withered before they bloomed. A sickly infant who coughed himself to sleep might vanish from the records with a simple note: God's will. Listen to the quiet rustle of silk as a queen sits beside a cradle, her eyes rimmed red from sleepless nights. She knows what the whispers in the court say: an heir must live, or the alliances inked on marriage contracts crumble like old parchment. A nurse lifts a tiny body, wraps it tighter in linen, and hums a lullaby that has comforted more royal mothers than any priest's blessing ever could. A lesser-known detail flickers here too. Some courts kept entire wings sealed off for special children heirs, whose minds never cleared, who never spoke in full sentences, who wandered gardens mumbling half-remembered prayers. The Spanish Habsburgs were not alone. The Bourbons, the Austrian archdukes, even distant cousins in Portugal and Naples, all harbored these hidden heirs. Some were raised as monks or nuns to keep their condition secret. Others simply disappeared behind monastery walls. Step closer to a cradle carved with golden lilies. Inside lies a child with wide, watery eyes and a faint shadow of the family jaw. Court physicians hover like anxious hawks, counting breaths, checking tiny fingers for tremors, watching for signs that the same bloodlines that crowned kings might steal this new prince's future before his first birthday. One quiet fact: the fate of royal children shaped entire wars. When an heir survived, treaties held. When an heir died, borders shifted, crowns fell, and distant cousins pressed dusty claims with armies and papal blessings. A single child's fragile heart could tip the balance of an empire. Historians still debate the hidden grief inside these palaces. Behind embroidered tapestries and grand portraits, royal mothers suffered loss after loss. Some queens bore 10, 12, 15 children, only to bury half of them before they learned to walk. To the public, these children were celebrated in gilded birth announcements. Behind closed doors, they were mourned in quiet chapels no chronicler dared describe in detail. Imagine the muted conversations that flickered through candlelit halls, a king's whispered hope that his new son would be stronger than the last, a wet nurse's private prayer that her milk would coax strength into the frail limbs she cradled night after night. One strange irony remains: the same dynastic logic that prized pure bloodlines produced heirs so fragile that new unions had to be arranged constantly fresh: cousin marriages, fresh dispensations, fresh cradles carved for infants who might never grow old enough to sit a throne. walk through this nursery one last time. The air smells of lavender and lye soap mingled with the faint sweetness of mother's milk. The floor creaks beneath your step, but the babies do not stir, some wrapped snug in blankets, embroidered with crowns, others so small they seem more dream than flesh. Beyond these doors, the next rooms hold more than lullabies and nurses' sighs. They hold the first quiet cracks that would spread through royal houses for generations. For what is a dynasty built on pure blood worth if the children born to rule crumble before they can wear the crown step softly now? The path ahead follows these fragile heirs into adulthood, where weak bloodlines would do what no foreign army could, turn mighty houses into ghosts, one pale prince at a time. Slip from the hush of the nursery into corridors grown colder over centuries. Passages where the portraits of proud ancestors watch silently as entire bloodlines weaken branch by fragile branch. This is the heart of the story, where royal inbreeding's quiet curse turns into a slow collapse the moment when mighty dynasties begin to crumble under the very purity they once guarded like a holy relic. In every cracked stone of these ancient castles lies a simple truth: no kingdom is stronger than its heirs. And when those heirs arrive, frail, childless, or lost to hidden illnesses, the thrones they were born to claim begin to totter no matter how many crowns glitter in the treasury. One undeniable fact repeats itself from Spain to Austria to France by the 17th century. Entire royal houses felt the creeping cost of centuries spent circling the same family tree. The Habsburgs of Spain, the branch you glimpsed in that dim nursery, fell hardest. Their final king, Charles II, wore a crown that weighed more than his brittle body could bear. Charles II, the so-called bewitched king, outlived every prediction. But his reign was a portrait of what happens when bloodlines fold in on themselves too many times. He could barely chew or speak, clearly suffered seizures that struck without warning, and fathered no child to carry the Habsburg name. Spain's golden empire shrank, while foreign ambassadors circled Madrid like vultures eyeing a throne no healthy prince would ever sit on again. Historians still debate where the line between superstition and science blurred for Charles. Some records hint that his advisors blamed witches for his weakness, ordering exorcisms that filled the royal chambers with incense and desperate prayers. But beneath the Latin chants lay the truth that doctors whispered behind thick doors. Centuries of cousin marriages had done what no assassin's blade could. A lesser-known detail lies buried in court letters. Even as the Habsburg line buckled under Charles, distant cousins jostled to keep the name alive through fresh, equally tangled unions. But each new marriage added fresh weight to the curse, a loop that could not be untied, only stretched until it snapped. Step now through the echoing halls of Vienna's Hofburg Palace. Here, the Austrian branch of the Habsburgs watched Spain's decline with dread, yet still arranged marriages that echoed the same fatal pattern. Faces on coins still bore that stubborn jaw. Portraits still showed the same heavy lids and regal chins. And in private chambers, family physicians fretted over pale heirs who coughed through winter and fainted during court dances. The Bourbon dynasty of France faced its own quiet collapse, hidden behind gilded mirrors and polite toasts. Though not as notorious as the Spanish Habsburgs, the Bourbons' discreet cousin marriages brewed a quieter version of the same poison. Historians still puzzle over Louis XVI. By some accounts, a king with a gentle mind and a body that carried whispers of the same weaknesses seen in his Spanish relatives. His fate, however, would not be decided by blood alone, but by revolution's blade. Sometimes the collapse was slower, more ghostly. Dynasties that once ruled continents dwindled to a single childless duke, a sickly princess, a last prince whose portraits looked back at generations of lost strength. When lines fell, maps changed borders, redrawn by claimants with fresher blood and armies more powerful than any ancient name. Imagine the quiet fear that slipped through palace walls during these final years. Advisors drafting emergency treaties, queens praying in side chapels for a miracle pregnancy, physicians prescribing pearl powders and relics for heirs who would never come. And in the shadows, rivals plotted foreign courts, watching for any flicker of weakness to seize lands and titles once thought untouchable. Some scholars still argue whether the collapse of these royal lines was fate or folly. Were they undone by stubborn pride, the refusal to seek new alliances outside the family's sacred circle? Or was it simply the old truth that nature abhors a closed loop, that blood too tightly bound will always find a way to break free? Stand here for a moment longer. The portraits stare back at you, stoic kings and delicate queens whose crowns hid the quiet truth winding through their veins. Beneath gold leaf and velvet cloaks, the royal bloodlines that shaped empires carried their own seeds of ruin, a curse whispered from cradle to coffin. As you step away from these fading halls, another door waits ahead, one that opens on a neighboring realm where France's Bourbons dance the same delicate steps, hoping their discreet ties would keep the throne steady. But even the finest silk veils can't hide the frayed threads beneath. The hush shifts now from Spain's crumbling throne to the gilt salons of France, where chandeliers glittered and powdered wigs framed faces that sometimes hid secrets no less tangled than their Spanish cousins. The Bourbons, those architects of Versailles and grand balls, spun their own quiet version of inbreeding, a French example so discreet that its traces often slipped through the cracks of official histories. Step softly through mirrored halls, lined with portraits that gaze down in powdered calm. The Bourbon line, like the Habsburgs, believed in keeping their royal essence safe behind familiar doors. But where Spain's alliances flaunted uncle-niece unions, the Bourbons favored subtler connections, second cousins marrying quietly under cathedral arches, distant relatives pledged to one another while diplomats toasted in candlelit chambers. One fact that sticks tucked into ledgers and dowry papers: Louis XIII, the Sun King himself, married his double first cousin, Maria Theresa of Spain. Their shared blood made their children not just heirs, but living proof of two great houses sealed tight by faith, and ironically, by the very closeness that would whisper trouble to future generations. Historians still disagree over just how far the Bourbon line's discreet inbreeding went. French court records, polished and carefully archived, rarely name the cousins woven into royal sheets, but fragments survive a noble marriage here, a discreet papal blessing. They're suggesting that what was flaunted in Madrid was merely draped in silk at Versailles. One lesser-known detail flickers in the quiet corners of these archives: the royal physicians who worried that the Sun King's children showed worrying signs of fragile health. One prince struggled with a weak heart. Another faded before his crown could touch his brow. Some blamed hidden illnesses carried from the Spanish line. Others dared whisper about the family closeness that shaped these delicate heirs. Picture the hush of a royal nursery at the French court. Velvet curtains, lace cradles, nurses in stiff white caps. Beyond the windows, Versailles bloomed with fountains and music, But inside these hushes lay the same fear you heard echoing in Spain, that an heir's cough, a limp, or a feeble constitution could topple the marble pillars of power. Step into a grand salon where powdered nobles gossip beneath gilded ceilings. They speak of court dances, royal hunts, and the Sun King's endless appetite for ceremony. But behind fans and lace cuffs, rumors flit that a princess has the same pale look as her cousin bride. That the line might bend too close if the next generation does not bring in fresh blood. Some historians still argue whether the Bourbons' quiet cousin marriages did real damage. Unlike the Habsburgs' glaring jawline, the French line's secrets were softer tucked behind layers of etiquette and carefully orchestrated distractions. Yet the pattern holds fragile heirs, sudden fevers, royal children who did not live long enough to see their portraits hung among ancestors with stronger bones. A curious irony glitters here. While France's royals clung to discreet closeness, they also flaunted mistresses' illegitimate lines and secret lovers. The official marriages might keep the bloodline pure on parchment, but the king's other children scattered through titled bastards and hush-hush inheritances often brought fresher blood into court circles than any arranged cousin match. Stand by a fireplace in a Versailles salon, listening to a marquis murmur to his confidant about the king's legitimate heir coughing through winter, while an illegitimate half-brother thrives on some quiet estate. Gossip and medicine swirl together. Like smoke, no one dares say outright that the pure line is the weaker one, but the whispers linger long after the candles burn down. One soft detail when the French Revolution cracked these gilded walls open the Bourbon line's discreet inbreeding did not save it from the blade. Louis XVI, awkward and hesitant, carried his line's old blood into a storm no pure pedigree could calm. Some say his gentle nature and indecisive will were simply character. Others suspect centuries of cousin vows dulled the edge that a king needed to hold back the tide. So step lightly through this palace, through these tapestries stitched with fleur-de-lis and faded prayers. The Bourbon line's secrets drift in silk and powdered wigs, in nursery shadows, and physicians' notes hidden in velvet drawers. They did not flaunt the curse like the Spanish did, but they did not escape it either. Beyond these French corridors waits another door, where holy dispensations turned forbidden kisses into sacred vows, paper shields that could not guard fragile heirs from the weight of the same old blood. Slip from Versailles' soft whispers to the hush of Rome's marble halls, where papal seals and red robes turned forbidden unions into holy blessings. If Europe's crowns learned one trick above all, it was this: when royal desire collided with sacred law, a slip of parchment could make even an uncle's embrace divine. Welcome to the chapter of papal permission, a quiet loophole that kept cousin vows legal and thrones polished with fragile heirs. Picture a cold chamber inside the Vatican. Flickering candlelight dances on frescoed walls while a bishop dips his quill in ink darker than any confession whispered in the Sistine Chapel. Before him lies a petition. A king requests the Pope's blessing to wed his brother's daughter. The language is delicate phrases, like dispensatio matrimonii, smooth over the jarring truth that the bride and groom share more blood than most siblings. One unshakable fact across the Middle Ages and well into the early modern era, papal dispensations were the lifeblood of royal matchmaking. Without Rome's nod, entire dynasties would have risked excommunication or rebellion if a marriage was declared void. So gold flowed into papal coffers, and rules that applied to villagers in dusty chapels bent like reeds in a royal breeze. Some historians still argue whether these permissions were granted for faith or for fortune. Church doctrine insisted marriage within 4 degrees of kinship was sin, but dynastic maps often didn't care. The Spanish Habsburgs alone secured dozens of papal dispensations, uncle to niece, cousin to cousin, turning family trees into wreaths Rome pretended were vineyards of holy order. A lesser-known detail curls through secret Vatican archives. Not all dispensations were so openly filed. Some arrived coded in diplomatic pouches, scribbled in Latin so dense that only trusted clerics knew whose union they had just sanctified. For powerful monarchs, a discreet blessing was worth more than 1,000 sermons. Imagine a papal scribe slipping the final document into a leather pouch bound for Madrid or Vienna. Outside, pilgrims kneel on the marble steps, praying for humble miracles, a child healed, a marriage saved. Inside, a royal envoy sips sweet wine with a cardinal counting on the same church that thundered against sin to polish the crown's tarnished family tree. Step softly into a cathedral, where the bride stands trembling at the altar, her veil so heavy with pearls it weighs down her neck. She knows the congregation whispers that she's marrying her cousin, perhaps even her uncle. But when the priest lifts the sacred parchment and intones Rome's blessing, the union transforms from rumor to righteousness. The choir sings the bell's toll, and another fragile heir is promised to Europe's future. One quiet irony: while the church sold these permissions to kings, it thundered against the same unions among common folk. A farmer's marriage to his first cousin risked scandal or excommunication. A king's marriage to his niece earned a public mass and a gilded feast. Some village priests refused to bless local cousin matches, yet eagerly toasted royal ones with bishops at cathedral banquets. Historians still debate whether popes truly believed these dispensations protected Christendom's unity or simply paid off Vatican debts. Letters between cardinals hint that for some, the sacred duty weighed heavily, a grim acknowledgement that holy paper could not cleanse twisted bloodlines. But others counted each gold ducat, each new vow, as proof that divine power could be bought like silks on a Genoese dock. Picture the hush after the feast. The bride, now queen, retires to her chambers, the dispensation locked away in an iron coffer with other treaties and family secrets. Generations later, that same slip of parchment will be copied by scribes, tracing the dynasty's claim when fragile heirs must prove they were born not of sin, but of sanctioned blessed blood. Stand here a moment longer, inside a grand basilica, where incense coils into the rafters and the marble saints stare down with stony eyes. These walls have heard confessions and coronations alike, yet they say nothing of the silent price paid by children born to papal loopholes. Beyond the incense, beyond the hush of Latin prayers, waits the real test of these holy papers' court corridors, where whispers grow louder than blessings and gossip threads its way through velvet drapes. For behind every papal seal lies a cradle, fragile, gilded, and waiting for the next heir who might carry more than the weight of a crown. Step out of Rome's marble hush and back into the candlelit corridors of Europe's courts, where the echo of holy seals fades into whispers that slip through velvet curtains and linger behind embroidered fans. Here, beyond papal parchments and painted family trees, lives the human truth. Courtiers gossip, secrets leak, and the hush that once hid fragile heirs unravels into rumors too tangled to silence. Welcome to the quiet scandal of whispers at court. Imagine a dim corridor in a Spanish palace, the walls lined with tapestries depicting knights and saints, while servants tiptoe past in soft slippers. In corners, pages lean close to whisper, that the young prince's jaw juts further than his father's. Maids giggle behind gloved hands about a princess's limp hidden beneath silk skirts. And always behind every hushed word lies the fear that the royal cradle's weakness might topple more than a crown, it might unravel an entire realm. One fact survives hidden in scattered letters and careful diaries. Europe's palaces teemed with unofficial scribes, ladies-in-waiting tutors, stewards who carried gossip from chamber to chamber like incense smoke curling through cathedral aisles. Their murmurs shaped alliances and destroyed them, weaving quiet dread through families who had traded freedom for purity. Historians still puzzle over how much of this court gossip was truth and how much was crafted to bruise reputations. A rival faction might spread tales of an heir too sickly to ride a queen too frail to bear more children, a young duke with wandering eyes and a mind lost to shadows. A careless rumor could become political fact overnight, carried by poets and pamphlets into taverns where peasants raised mugs and wondered if their king's blood was cursed. A lesser-known detail flickers behind these silk walls. Palace servants, those who dressed the royals, cleaned their chambers, and rocked royal infants in sleepless nurseries, often knew more than any bishop or ambassador. Their secrets sometimes spilled under the weight of coin purses or the thrill of whispered rebellion. In courts from Madrid to Versailles, a chambermaid's muttered word could cost a minister his place at the king's table. Picture a grand feast in a French salon, powdered wigs, gilded goblets, laughter echoing under frescoed ceilings. Amid the toast to the king's robust air, a court poet slips in a sly line about porcelain princes and glass-boned queens. The line gets a soft laugh, a sharper glance from a rival, and by dawn the rhyme has turned into a rumor sung by servants in the kitchens below. Some scholars still argue how much these whispers hastened royal decline. Did gossip merely echo truths already rotting the family tree, or did it crack the marble illusion that divine blood could not sour? Either way, the damage was done long before a fragile prince ever took the throne. One soft irony slips through these corridors. Kings and queens spent fortunes on painters and architects to build their legend in stone and canvas, yet a single line muttered behind a closed door could unravel decades of crafted splendor. Gossip was the one force no crown or papal seal could fully command. Step closer to an antechamber lined with portraits, kings with scepters, queens with jeweled collars, all staring out with serene faces that hid their bones' secret conversations. Here you might overhear a nervous lady-in-waiting confide to a trusted cousin that the heir's wet nurse worries about his fragile lungs. A steward nods grimly, another hush to keep behind bolted doors. But by dawn, a page boy knows, a stable hand knows, and by dusk, the city knows too. Listen to the muffled giggles of servants polishing silver as they swap stories about the king's brother's stammer, or the duke's daughter who faints in the garden when the sun shines too hot. These stories slip beyond the palace gates, embroidered and embellished, until they reach the crowded markets, where peasants joke that royal blood is just thin soup wrapped in gold. Historians still debate whether these rumors were mercy or poison. Some say gossip softened public rage if a king was pitied for sickly heirs. Perhaps peasants forgave heavy taxes and empty grain stores. Others argue the whispers sharpened knives, reminding hungry crowds that divine right looked strangely mortal when it stumbled on a nursery floor. So stand here beneath the flickering candlelight and feel the weight of secrets pressed into stone walls and silk hangings. The hush that once protected royal blood now cracks with laughter and rumor, a quiet rebellion that no gilded throne can silence for long. Beyond these corridors, the story deepens into the cold calculations that chose power over health-sealing family fates, with alliances scribbled on parchment no cure could erase. Slip deeper into these endless halls, where the soft rustle of silk skirts fades behind the sharper scratch of quills on parchment. Here, the hush of rumor gives way to the cold click of strategy, where kings and queens traded fragile health for ironclad power, convinced that political alliances could patch over bloodlines already fraying at the seams. This is the hush of power over health, the unspoken pact that survival of the crown always outweighed survival of the body. Picture a royal council chamber, candlelit and thick with the scent of ink and burning tallow. Around a heavy oak table, advisors lean in, eyes flicking to maps dotted with tiny crowns and borders that shift like restless dreams. A young princess's health, a prince's weak lungs. These are not family sorrows here, but leverage pieces in a high-stakes game that crosses mountains and seas. One fact stands stubborn in every page of dynastic history. No matter how many fragile heirs sickened in cradle or throne room, the next marriage contract always favored politics over fresh blood. If a cousin in Spain could secure a border with France, then the question of too close was politely ignored under cathedral arches. If a niece in Austria promised a steady link to the Holy Roman Empire, her faint cough and pale skin were brushed aside with the flick of a bishop's quill. Historians still argue whether the royals truly understood the medical cost. Some say they did that letters between monarchs and advisors whisper worries about delicate constitutions and the family's burden. Others argue they clung to superstition, trusting priests, and potions more than any early science, believing that a saint's relic could banish weakness more effectively than marrying outside the family circle. A lesser-known detail flickers in dispatches from Spanish envoys at the height of the Habsburg line's decline. Even the Holy Roman Emperor's Council admitted the risk of inbreeding behind closed doors. But when foreign threats knocked at the gates, they chose the nearest niece over an unrelated noble's daughter. Power, first blood, second health last. Step into a drafty gallery where paintings of frail young kings line the walls. Some never lived to see their coronations. Others sat the throne for only a heartbeat before illness or childlessness ended their line. Yet each portrait is proof that one more marriage was arranged not to break the curse, but to keep the same names stitched into Europe's crown. Imagine a tired queen brushing her child's hair by candlelight, praying over a weak pulse she knows came from a cousin's vow, inked years before she was born. She knows, too, that if this child fails, another betrothal waits a match, already scribbled in draft letters sealed with wax. Fresh alliances, old blood, same gamble. Some historians still puzzle over moments when monarchs almost broke the pattern. A few scattered letters hint at kings who sought new lines, distant princesses, lesser nobles, even wealthy merchant families. But these fresh matches threaten too many claims, too many lands tangled in old family ties. In the end, the circle always closed back on itself. A soft irony drifts through these halls. The same courts that hired Europe's best physicians ignored their quiet warnings. Doctors prescribed pearl powders, herbal tonics, prayers stitched into silk sachets, anything but new blood. They were paid to keep heirs alive, not to question why the next heir would be born as fragile as the last. Stand here a moment, beside a marble bust of a king who reigned only on paper, His crown outlived him by decades past to distant cousins who married back into the same tree until the roots strangled themselves. The hush that protected secrets became a hush of empty cradles and closed nurseries, while maps shifted to fill the gaps left by vanished heirs. Beyond these chambers, armies gathered, borders bristled. Rival monarchs watched for any sign that weak blood could open a door to conquest, and more often than not it did. The wars that redrew Europe's lines were born as much in these candlelit council rooms as on muddy battlefields, wars fed by alliances sealed in cousins' kisses, not cannon fire alone. So linger for a breath in this corridor, where ink and ambition outweighed common sense, and soft prayers for healthy children. Ahead lies the final stretch of this hush, a corridor where fragile houses stumble toward their last chapters, carrying the hidden cost of cursed purity all the way to a quiet decline. Step with me one last time down this winding corridor of marble and candle smoke, where centuries of secret vows, holy permissions, and whispered gossip gather like dust in the folds of velvet drapes. Here lies the final decline, where the once mighty houses that guarded their bloodlines so fiercely stand face to face with the quiet cost of their cursed purity. Picture the end, not as a sudden fall, but as a slow, soft unraveling. The Habsburgs of Spain drifted first. Charles II, the bewitched king, wheezed his last breath in 1700, his jaw so heavy it seemed to pull the crown down with him. His death didn't just close a nursery door. It slammed shut a dynasty that once commanded half the world. With no child to carry his name, rival claimants bared swords and signed treaties in equal measure, carving up the old empire piece by piece. One stubborn fact marks every page of this story: where royal blood ran in tight circles, so did fate's scissors. The Spanish line fell first, then its branches in Austria and the Low Countries, each union of cousin and niece shrinking the pool of healthy heirs. The same family portraits that once boasted divine right now hang like quiet reminders that nature plays no favorites, even with crowns and papal seals. Some historians still debate whether the end was inevitable. Could a single bold match, one foreign bride from a distant court, one prince wed to a robust merchant's daughter, have broken the curse? Letters tucked into royal archives suggest that some kings considered it. But for every whispered plan of fresh alliances, the old logic rose up: keep it in the family, keep it sacred, keep it pure. And so they did, until the blood was so tangled it had nowhere left to flow. A lesser-known detail drifts through these echoing halls. When the Habsburg line crumbled, new houses rushed in with fresh claims, fresh flags, and fresh blood. The Bourbons of France seized Spain's vacant throne, bringing their own discreet cousin ties, but at least enough new stock to stave off the same doom, at least for a while. Yet even they could not dodge the quiet price forever. Louis XVI, nervous and decisive, far removed from the robust son, king faced a revolution his name could not calm. The guillotine made quick work of bloodlines that centuries of cousin marriages had only ever weakened behind silk curtains. Stand a moment longer in this final corridor. Picture the marble floors cold underfoot, the portraits overhead peering down with proud jaws and identical noses that once seemed proof of divine blessing. Now, they are just shadows, faces caught in paint, forever staring at the children who never came, the lines that never extended past fragile spines and quiet nurseries. Some scholars still argue whether these royal houses truly learned from the curse they stitched into their veins. The modern monarchies that remain fewer, now quieter symbolic rather than absolute long ago, opened their family trees to wider branches. Commoners married into crowns, once guarded like sacred relics. Fresh blood mended old cracks that no potion of pearl dust or papal paper ever could. Yet the echo lingers whispers in castle halls turned museums, rumors pressed between the pages of dusty ledgers, portraits whose eyes follow you down marble staircases. They remind us that power, when hoarded too tightly, finds ways to poison itself. That purity, when prized above sense, can turn crowns to iron chains around fragile bones. Tonight, as you leave this royal hush behind, carry one final thought with you. The line between legacy and curse is thinner than silk. In the glow of candlelight, it gleamed like a holy thread. But in the quiet of bedchambers and nurseries, it tied itself into knots that not even kings could undo. But if you think this tangled legacy was unique to Europe's marble corridors, step now through a warmer door into lands where sun-baked stone and temple shadows reveal the same hungry ties of blood bound even closer than crown and cousin. Beneath the golden sun of ancient Egypt, royal blood wasn't just precious, it was too precious to spill into common veins. In candlelit chambers, perfumed with lotus and warmed by the hush of desert winds, siblings exchanged vows, crowns and secrets that defied the very taboos we whisper about tonight. Why would a brother become a husband? Why would a sister wear a bridal crown and a snake-headed scepter all at once? If your eyelids grow heavier with every hidden scandal, do me a quiet favor. Press like and subscribe before your thumb drifts away with your thoughts. It helps keep this royal gossip flowing, softly, endlessly. And if you're listening under the covers, half awake, tell me whose throne would you secretly steal if no one was watching? Now rest your head deeper into the pillow. Let's slip into the past, where temple shadows flicker over granite walls and royal siblings hold hands behind curtains of linen and incense. You wander through corridors lined with carvings and unending parade of falcon-headed gods and hieroglyphs that promise eternity to those who keep the blood pure. You pause at a painted chamber. Here sits Pharaoh divine ruler, next to his sister wife, their fingers entwined on a throne meant for two. The air is heavy with burnt myrrh, a sweetness masking a truth older than the pyramids themselves. In this place, incest is not whispered, but declared carved for all to see on stelae that stand firm against centuries of desert storms. A royal marriage to a sister was not born of desire alone, it was power's clever shield. By keeping the line unbroken, the crown's claim to divinity stayed intact. Scholars still debate whether this practice sprang from a priestly fear of dilution or a pragmatic need to guard succession. Some insist the gods demanded it. Others think it was simply the easiest way to keep courtiers from grasping too much. One dusty scroll tells of Pharaoh Akhenaten and his beloved Nefertiti, though historians argue fiercely whether she was truly his sister or simply of noble blood. But the stories persist tales of Cleopatra's own siblings, meeting convenient ends, her father Ptolemy Tween, mired in family plots that left the Nile's reeds slick with rumor. You imagine standing there, the warm stone beneath your bare feet, hearing the conspiratorial hush of palace servants. A slip of the tongue, a glance too long, at an unapproved suitor, these could topple kingdoms carefully balanced on bloodlines, tighter than the wrappings on a royal mummy. There's a detail they rarely carve in stone, but whisper instead, through the crackling papyrus, the children. Some were hailed as god kings reborn, their eyes lined with kohl before they could speak. Others, sickly or strangely formed, vanish from records, a silent scholars poke at with hesitant fingers. The curse of keeping power so close, perhaps, or just the world's ancient way of reminding rulers they were human after all. As you drift deeper into the past, you notice how life outside the palace beats on farmers, pushing reeds aside scribes hunched over ledgers of grain, and taxes priests chanting to Ra as the sun dips into the Nile. For them, the pharaoh's marriage to his sister means little more than the promise of floods and harvests. Yet in those gilded chambers, secrets swirl thicker than desert sandstorms, and every royal birth cements the dynasty or poisons it from within. Surviving records offer conflicting accounts of how the people truly felt. Some scholars argue the common folk accepted it as divine will, while others suggest temple gossip and village tales may have carried a quiet mocking tune. But the walls stand silent now, leaving you only the carved embraces of siblings who ruled as gods loved as mortals, and left behind questions that linger like the fading scent of lotus on night air. Let your breath slow with the hush of these ancient halls. There's more to see, more forbidden unions, more tangled thrones waiting just beyond this chamber. But for now, hold this truth: in the shadows of Egypt's temples, family ties bound kingdoms tighter than stone and sand ever could. Slip deeper, past the granite pillars, where a single name echoes through time: Cleopatra. Her bloodline tangled and dangerous is your next secret passageway through royal scandals older than Rome's first bricks. You see her now, drifting through the torchlit halls of Alexandria's palace, silk trailing over mosaic floors, gold bands coiled around her arms like restless snakes. The last pharaoh of Egypt knew power was fragile as papyrus and twice as flammable, so she clutched it, the only way her dynasty knew how, by keeping the bloodline perilously tight. The Ptolemies were Greek by origin, heirs of Alexander's fractious empire, but they ruled Egypt with a distinctly Egyptian trick marrying their own. Cleopatra's father, Ptolemy XIV, was a king whose half-siblings may have been his rivals and lovers all at once. Surviving records murmur that Cleopatra herself may have wed her brothers Ptolemy III and XIV, though historians still argue if this was symbolic or consummated behind silken drapes. There is no scholarly consensus on how deep those royal beds ran, but the line held for a while. Imagine standing in the palace courtyard, a scented garden of pomegranate trees and marble pools. In this hush of petals falling onto polished stone, Cleopatra's court, plotted, whispered, and poisoned with honeyed words. She was no innocent pawn. Her mind was sharper than the daggers that felled her enemies, but even she couldn't outrun the legacy of a family bound by blood, and undone by it too. One quirky detail that never makes it into Hollywood's smoky eyeliner fantasies: Cleopatra was not the seductive anomaly she's painted as today. She was the last desperate link in a dynasty famed less for charm than for cunning and breeding. She spoke half a dozen languages, debated philosophers in the Library of Alexandria, and signed royal decrees with the same hand that may have signed marriage pacts to her siblings. Step closer to her portrait, half erased on temple walls, defaced by Roman soldiers centuries later. The marble nose gone, the paint chipped by time, but you can almost smell the perfume of crushed rose petals that clung to her skin. Some scholars remain puzzled by just how far Cleopatra pushed the incest tradition. Was she breaking free of it when she sought Rome's powerful arms in Julius Caesar and Mark Antony? Or was she weaving the same old spell, binding herself to power by any blood, any bed, any whispered vow in the dark? Beneath the hush of Alexandria's waves, secrets sink like sunken ships. Coins stamped with Cleopatra's regal profile lie buried in the harbor mud treasures that outlasted her line's last heartbeat. No child of her brother husbands survived to wear the double crown. Instead, her union with Antony left twin children, neither of whom would ever sit on Egypt's throne. It's strange, isn't it? The dynasty clung so fiercely to its tangled roots that it forgot to plant new ones. And so, Cleopatra's tangled bloodline withered when Octavian's Roman legions closed in. Some say her final breath was sweetened by asp venom, a symbol of royal power, curled cold against her skin, an echo of the snake crowns that crowned Ptolemaic brides before her. You can almost hear the hush of the Mediterranean at dusk waves licking the stones of a ruined palace. Somewhere under that water, the last secrets of Cleopatra's bloodline sleep among barnacled statues and shattered amphorae. You lean closer, wondering what whispers linger there, what gossip the marble lips might spill if they weren't buried in sand. Outside the palace walls, the farmers still coaxed the Nile to rise and fall. Merchants bargained for dates and linen, and none of them would ever touch the throne. The royal family's sacred, incestuous circle stayed sealed from the common veins until history cracked it open with Roman steel and ambition. So as your eyelids grow heavier under the weight of Cleopatra's vanished line, remember this blood can bind poison and enthrone, but it rarely forgives. And in the hush of the harbor's waves, the last queen of Egypt still drifts half goddess, half mortal, forever wrapped in rumor. Step away from Alexandria's dying embers and cross desert sands eastward, where Persian kings stitched bloodlines together with silk threads of kinship secrecy and whispers of scandal. The Achaemenid Empire, grand and sprawling, hid its own tangled pairings within palace walls, carved from alabaster and rumor alike. You drift now through Persepolis, the ceremonial heart of Persia, columns rising like petrified forests under a desert moon. Here, the royal court gathered under vast canopies embroidered with gold threads. Among the courtiers' bowed heads, the great king, Shahanshah, king of kings, would greet wives who were sometimes closer than custom would admit. Peek past the linen curtains, and you might find a sister offered not just as a political bride to foreign satraps, but sometimes kept closer, much closer inside the palace itself. The Achaemenids, famed for their tolerance and vast roads connecting worlds, guarded their crown the same way Egypt did by folding family inward. Some scholars continue to debate how common these close kin pairings were. Were they symbolic titles of sisterhood or literal unions beneath peacock-feathered fans? The truth flickers like an oil lamp caught in palace drafts. Picture Atassa, daughter of Cyrus the Great and queen in her own right. Her marriage to Darius the White linked two mighty lines, and according to some ancient scribes, may have pulled tight an even more intimate knot. Was she his half-sister, or just the empire's convenient bridge? Historians still argue over dusty tablets and Greek gossip that's more rumor than record. But her influence was undeniable. Atassa's children shaped Persia's future, one royal sibling at a time. One detail, often lost among the grandeur of palaces and battlefields. Persian kings, unlike their Egyptian cousins, cloaked these unions under layers of protocol and ritual. Official titles muddied blood ties, blending sister wives with distant cousins until no parchment could quite pin down where family ended and politics began. Some accounts hint at secret ceremonies behind carved cedar doors, weddings so private only priestly scribes dared record their vows in cuneiform lines that still crack under museum glass today. You stand among Persepolis' ruined halls, now moonlight, brushing over fallen capitals carved with lion-headed warriors. You listen for footsteps, perhaps, of royal brides, hidden beneath heavy veils, escorted by eunuchs, through midnight corridors, to a king who saw no border between family and statecraft. Outside, the empire's vastness pressed against these secrets. Satraps ruled far-flung provinces, from the Indus to the Aegean, trading silk and spices, while court gossip drifted west with Greek envoys who scribbled half-truths in their journals. Herodotus, that father of history and father of hearsay, left behind stories that swirl with incestuous hints. Whether truth or Greek embellishment, the stories stuck like wax seals on royal letters. You lean closer to a palace wall, tracing the bas-relief of a procession servants, bearing gifts, dignitaries, bowing royal guards standing stone still for centuries. Somewhere in this crowd might be a sister queen, her eyes lowered, her mind sharp as a scimitar's edge. She knows that by binding herself to her brother, she holds the empire's fragile future in her womb. Yet for all its secrecy, Persian incest never bloomed as overtly as Egypt's bold carvings. Here, the scandal lingers like a desert wind felt but rarely seen. Some argue the Greeks exaggerated it, eager to paint their Eastern rivals as decadent. Others point to Zoroastrian texts, hinting at kvaetvadatha, sacred marriages within the family, though scholars disagree on how literally these doctrines shaped courtly unions. Imagine the whispered prayers offered in fire temples, flames dancing on bronze altars, while royal secrets burned just as fiercely in silken chambers nearby. The empire's roads might stretch 1,000 miles, but the king's bed remained the shortest path to power for sisters and cousins whose names drift across clay tablets like fading echoes. Tonight, the Achaemenids rest in stone Persepolis, pillaged by Alexander, its treasures lost to flame and time. Yet these pairings linger in half-buried scrolls and half-believed tales. You stand among the ruins, a ghost in moonlight, wondering if these royal sisters dreamed of freedom, or if they embraced their tangled roles, queens and kin-mothers to empires that would crumble, yet never quite confess their secrets. So breathe out slowly under this starlit Persian sky. There are more royal scandals ahead, more families folding in on themselves, more thrones balanced on forbidden vows. But tonight, here among broken columns and drifting sand, remember the empire's roads carried silk and spices, but its secrets traveled faster, hidden in the folds of royal veils and whispered through palace doors that no enemy ever truly breached. Slip across an ocean of waves and centuries of chance until warm winds brush your skin. Welcome to the islands of Hawaii, where bloodlines once glowed with sacred manna and chiefs wed sisters to keep the divine spark burning bright. You stand now on a lush slope overlooking the endless Pacific. Palm fronds whisper above, and the night hums with the low croak of tree frogs and the distant break of waves against volcanic stone. Here rank and closeness weren't opposites. They were partners in a ritual dance that shaped Hawaii's highest ruling class for generations. Among the Ali'i Nui, the noble class sibling unions were not scandal, but necessity. The kapu system, ancient taboos, woven through every aspect of life, wrapped family ties in spiritual rules that could make or break a dynasty's right to rule. A chief's rank was measured by genealogy, like a cord of twisted lei, with the tightest braids commanding the most respect, and mana, that unseen life force connecting rulers to gods. You listen to the surf below and imagine Kamehameha's ancestors gathering under torchlight. Brothers and sisters seated together, betrothal chants echoing over the waves. Some unions produced children so highly ranked they were called N-Alpio chiefs, living embodiments of power so pure that their touch alone could render lower-born mortals kapu forbidden to approach. One curious detail tucked into oral histories: these unions weren't forced secrets, but proud declarations of lineage recited by genealogists who memorized generations stretching back to deities. Some Ali trace their blood directly to Papa and Wakia Earth Mother, and Sky Father, whose own union birthed islands and lineages alike. The family tree here was less a tree than a tight circle roots and branches entwined until no outsider's blood dared dilute it. Yet even in paradise, questions bloom like hibiscus at dawn. Some scholars debate whether every Ennaopio pairing was truly sibling marriage, or if cousin marriages also ranked high blurred the lines in songs and chants handed down by elders. Oral tradition, like ocean waves, shifts and reshapes the stories it carries. You wander further into a chief's compound. Picture woven mats laid out for feasting under thatched roofs, the scent of roasted pig and taro mingling with sea salt and sweet smoke. Here, sacred unions bore sacred heirs, and any rival chief with lesser blood risked revolt or quiet exile. The island's isolation made these rules both necessary and dangerous. No distant kings to marry, no foreign alliances to strengthen the bloodline. The islands were the world, and the family was the world within. European missionaries arriving in the 19th century recoiled at the practice. They wrote disapproving letters, home-branding the Alii customs as immoral and heathenish. But they missed the point. The practice wasn't born from carnal secrecy, but cosmic order. The kapu that kept commoners from stepping on the chief's shadow came from the same force that blessed sibling unions among rulers. It was all one braid of power, taboo, and spiritual balance. In the fading glow of the campfire, you hear echoes of Queen Lily Wakalani's lament for her lost kingdom, a realm where blood purity once meant mana, until foreign powers brought muskets, missionaries, and a new moral code that cracked open ancient ways. The royal lines still pulse in family stories, chants and genealogies recited at family gatherings. But the kapu that made brother and sister one sovereign line faded with the annexation of Hawaii. Today, you can stand in the cool shade of Iolani Palace, the only royal palace on American soil, and sense the ghost of that sacred lineage in the walls. Listen closely. Some say the floors still carry whispers of ancient kapu footsteps of chiefs who walked not just as rulers, but as living gods, born of unions outsiders could never understand. Some researchers continue to debate how widespread these practices were across the islands, or whether they were reserved only for the highest lines on certain shores. Oral histories offer clues half-sung, half-forgotten, waiting for you to piece them together, like a lay of old petals drifting on the tide. So close your eyes and feel the warm night air brush your cheek. Know that once, on these volcanic shores, a sister and brother might stand together under a breadfruit tree. Palms pressed together, their children destined to rule waves and wind alike until foreign sails pierced the horizon, carrying new laws that no chant could silence. There are more hidden unions waiting beyond this shore, secrets whispered through courts, temples, and jungle paths alike. But tonight, you rest here, where island stars blink through coconut fronds, and the royal bloodlines once glowed as bright as the moonlit surf, rolling endlessly onto black, volcanic rock. Leave the island breezes behind and step through jeweled gates into the marble courtyards of Mughal India, where rumors swirl like incense around the silken slippers of emperors and queens cloistered behind carved stone screens. Here, whispers of inbreeding drifted through corridors, scented with rosewater, and opulence half hidden in harem shadows and half buried in court chronicles. You walk barefoot across cool white marble, your footsteps echoing under scalloped arches. The Mughal court was a tapestry of delicate balance: Persian poetry, Central Asian bloodlines, Hindu alliances woven in through strategic marriages. And within this swirl, the question hums like a sitar string. Just how close did royal blood mix to keep power within reach? Historians still puzzle over the hush around the zenana, the women's quarters, where imperial daughters, sisters, and cousins lived under strict purdah. Some say these high-walled harems were less dens of indulgence and more cages of control, ensuring that noble blood, Timurid Persian Rajput, circulated only where the emperors willed it. Imagine Humayun, the second Mughal emperor, forging alliances with powerful clans by marrying cousins close enough to make foreign observers squirm. Or Akbar the Great, who expanded the empire by marrying Rajput princesses, but also maintained tight cousin ties within the extended Timurid line. Surviving records are slippery scribes praise the political genius, but rarely detailed just how entwined the branches of the family tree grew under Akbar's gilded canopy. Some scholars argue it was calculated marriage as a braid of loyalty and legitimacy. Others suggest it drifted closer to taboo, a hidden mirror of Persian and Egyptian traditions. Peer behind a carved marble jolly, those latticed windows that let breeze and eyes pass, but not wandering daughters. Inside, a young princess listens to court poets recite tales of ancestors who claim descent from Timur and Genghis Khan. Her worth is her lineage doubled if kept within the family's armored circle. A marriage to a cousin strengthens her father's hand at court. An alliance outside the blood risks a rival claim or dagger in the dark. One curious whisper that lingers in palace lore, the rumor of Shah Jahan's deep affection for Mumtaz Mahal, his beloved wife and cousin. When she died, birthing their 14th child, he built the Taj Mahal, a marble memory carved with tears and secrets. Some accounts hint that keeping the bond within bloodlines wasn't just about royal pedigree, but an act of love that defied the outside world. Whether true or embroidered by poets, the Taj's domes still gleam under the moon, a reminder of love bound by marble and perhaps by kinship too close for modern eyes. Outside these walls, the empire churned with intrigue. Rajput kings, watching every Mughal match, Portuguese envoys, scribbling shocked letters, home Jesuit missionaries, penning cryptic notes about royal unions they half understood. Some Mughal chroniclers loyal to the court left such rumors unspoken, hoping to keep foreign gossip from staining the empire's marble pride. Step into the Diwan-i-Khas, the hall of private audience where emperors perched on jewel-encrusted thrones. Here, imperial secrets sat heavier than rubies close-kin marriages murmured about, but rarely carved into official histories. The empire's Persian roots and Mongol bloodlines swirled together like silk in a monsoon wind. Some researchers continue to debate how widespread these royal cousin matches were. Did they fortify the dynasty, or leave it vulnerable to whispers and hidden frailties among the gardens of Shalimar, where fountains murmured under the Kashmir sun? Emperors and their consorts wandered shaded paths, sister-like, cousins, cousin-like sisters, each alliance a knot binding court factions to the peacock throne. The Mughal elite's love of poetry, calligraphy, and silk hid these pairings under metaphors of blooming roses and binding vines, fragile, perfumed, and prickled with thorns for any who dared pluck the truth into daylight. Tonight you stand among ghostly arches and jasmine-scented courtyards, hearing echoes of anklets in corridors long since fallen silent. The Mughal line, once vast and powerful, faded under the push of colonial boots and rival swords. But the rumors remain half-truths, etched in family scrolls, half erased by time's monsoon. So close your eyes and listen to the faint trickle of a marble fountain in moonlight. Imagine a young princess behind her jolly window, dreaming of gardens and freedom, while her fate is sealed in the ink of genealogies too tightly wound to let her slip away. In the hush of the zenana, the empire's heartbeat whispered, "Keep power close, closer than the world would ever guess." Drift southward now, where warm rain drips through tangled jungles and golden sun warms stone pyramids rising from green valleys. Welcome to the Aztec Empire, where noble bonds were guarded like sacred corn seeds and royal blood wove through generations like an unbroken vine. You stand in Tenochtitlan, the shimmering city that once floated like a jewel on Lake Texcoco. Around you, causeways hum with life canoes, loaded with cacao priests, whispering prayers to Huitzilopochtli nobles wrapped in cotton cloaks dyed deep indigo. Among these bustling avenues, the ruling Mexica class guarded their lineage with an unspoken rule: keep the bloodline pure, keep the empire strong. Marriage among Aztec nobles was never just a union of two hearts. It was a careful dance of alliances, tribute, and spiritual legitimacy. The Tlatoani, the speaker king, needed a queen whose veins sang the same ancestral songs. Sometimes those queens were cousins so close they'd grown up together under the watchful gaze of palace priests. The higher the rank, the closer the ties, like carefully stacked maize ears stored to feed the city through droughts and siege alike. A lesser-known twist flickers through the records. Aztec rulers didn't trumpet these unions from pyramid tops like their Egyptian cousins did, nor did they bury them under silk screens like the Mughals. Instead, these ties lived quietly in the coded language of Nahuatl, where a sister could be called precious jewel, or flower-blurred lines of kinship spoken in verses recited at royal weddings. Scholars still argue whether some of these poetic words signaled literal sibling marriages or simply poetic closeness. Surviving codices, painted with turquoise pigments and obsidian ink, offer hints but never a full confession. Imagine stepping into Moctezuma II's palace. Parrots call from wooden cages, and somewhere in the inner courtyard, the royal wives and concubines drift like shadows behind reed screens. Each wife, a political bond, each child a new link in a chain of noble blood. For the Mexica, controlling who married, who meant controlling the tribute flowing from faraway cities, each new alliance like a netcast wider over Mesoamerica's fractious city-states. One quirky footnote scholars love to mention: the Aztecs codified almost every aspect of daily life: what cloth you could wear, how many steps you could take into a temple, which feather was fit for your hair. But they left royal bedroom matters veiled in layers of polite ambiguity. Spanish friars, scribbling furiously in their chronicles after conquest, struggled to untangle these family knots. Some accounts claim Moctezuma's daughters were offered to Cortés as concubines, a final desperate attempt to bend the invader's will through the same ties that once bound the Mexica Empire together. Some researchers continue to debate whether these practices were widespread or confined to the ruler's inner circle. The calm lakes and causeways hid much, while commoners paid tribute in cacao. and cloth noble families bartered bloodlines behind closed doors. Marriage was a contract, not just of love or duty, but of power, carefully distilled through generations of close-knit unions. You wander through the marketplace, now listening to merchants haggle over obsidian blades and strings of jade beads. Overhead, the Templo Mayor rises, a double pyramid, honoring Tlaloc and Huitzilopochtli gods, demanding blood sacrifices to keep the sun alive. In that same breath, the Aztec nobles offered up their own bloodlines, carefully nurtured, strictly guarded, tightly coiled, like the serpent Quetzalcoatl, slithering through creation myths. There's an echo here, an irony shimmering like lake water under a rising sun, the same obsession with purity that built the Aztec nobility's power also made them vulnerable to outsiders who cared little for lineages and sacred taboos. When the Spanish swords came, they sliced through genealogies like reeds at the lake's edge. Yet pieces of those bloodlines survive, traced through family names, whispered in Nahuatl prayers, still murmured in highland villages. Outside the grand plazas, life pulsed on farmers, planting chinampas on floating gardens, weavers dyeing cloth, a red so bright it startled the Europeans. For them, the royal marriage games meant tribute, owed taxes, paid a new ruler to honor with feathers and cocoa beans. But in the palace shadows, the quiet, careful pairing of cousins and kin built an empire so intricate that even its ruin left tangled roots under Mexico's modern streets. So breathe in the scent of marigolds drifting through the night market. Somewhere under those petals lies the story of a dynasty that trusted its future to hidden chambers and noble blood, so close, so guarded, yet ultimately so fragile beneath the weight of steel and foreign tongues. Slip further east, now past the Great Wall's stone spine, and into the silk-draped corridors of China's Forbidden City, where emperors ruled behind crimson gates and family ties twisted in quiet shadows, sometimes too close for the official records to say aloud. Step softly across the vast courtyard, where dawn's first light catches the golden roof tiles, the air sharp with the scent of incense drifting from ancestral altars. Here, every move was ritual, every breath a negotiation between family loyalty and the swirling threats of palace intrigue. For centuries, the dragon throne depended not just on armies and taxes, but on delicate bloodlines, carefully maintained within the labyrinth of royal relatives. Unlike Egypt's bold inscriptions or Persia's half-whispers, China's imperial chronicles wove their secrets behind layers of euphemism, cousin marriages, uncle-niece, pairings rare but never fully absent, flowed through dynasties like faint threads in brocade, too intricate to unpick completely. Some scholars point to the Han and Ming courts, where genealogies folded back on themselves, binding alliances so tight they blurred the line between clan strength and taboo. Imagine yourself slipping behind a vermilion door, where the Empress Dowager sits jade hairpins glinting in the candlelight. Her power rests on keeping the imperial line untangled from outside ambition. Yet inside rumor has it, close kin matches stitched wounds that court politics alone could not mend. In the Qing dynasty, cousin marriages were openly practiced among Manchu clans to hold the 8 banners together. Some princesses wed their father's nephews, a neat solution to the threat of rival noble houses diluting pure Manchu blood. One curious detail hidden in the footnotes, the imperial household law, allowed certain exceptions for these marriages under strict conditions often framed as reinforcing clan unity. Official scribes softened the words with Confucian justifications, filial piety, family harmony, while leaving the messier reality folded into footnotes no poet dared immortalize. You drift down, echoing corridors, lined with painted screens, cranes in flight, plum blossoms and frost. Beyond them, eunuchs scurry with scrolls and trays of bitter tea. Some knew more than any official historian, eyes and ears, collecting courtly gossip. Which cousin received the emperor's favor? Which aunt's daughter was quietly betrothed to a nephew to patch a family feud? There's a scholar's debate that still lingers among dusty archives. How deeply did the emperors believe in the necessity of these hidden unions? Some argue it was less about lust and more about the relentless chess game of maintaining control. A son born of a trusted cousin might secure a fragile claim more surely than an alliance with an ambitious courtier's daughter. It was palace pragmatism wrapped in layers of silk screens and polite silence. Peer into one chamber, where a young princess stands by a window, her embroidered sleeve brushing lacquered wood. She recites lines of poetry about plum blossoms surviving winter's bite, an echo perhaps of her own fate to marry within the clan, blossom in the cold to keep the imperial garden blooming. One record tells of the Ming court debating whether to legitimize an uncle's wish to marry his niece, citing ancient precedent from older dynasties. Surviving scrolls disagree on whether it happened, but the rumor never quite fades. Outside the Forbidden City, the common folk rarely whispered about these unions. Their concern lay with the harvest, the rice taxes, the tides of river floods and droughts. A cousin marriage behind palace gates mattered little to farmers tending terraces carved into misty hillsides. For them, the emperor was a figure glimpsed on silk banners during festivals. His private chambers might as well have been the moon. One overlooked quirk China's imperial clan system was so vast that keeping bloodlines pure sometimes meant navigating tangled cousin branches that looped back dozens of generations. Genealogists appointed to guard these records wielded quiet power, able to erase a line, legitimize a scandal, or smooth over a marriage that crept too close to the edge of taboo. Researchers today continue to puzzle over scrolls smudged with ink and time, each one offering hints, but rarely confessions. As you drift back into the night air, you pass under red lanterns, swaying in a breeze scented faintly of sandalwood and plum wine. Beyond the towering gates, the city sleeps, merchants pack away, silk bolts, storytellers pack up paper puppets. But inside these walls, the imperial line winds on, like a silk dragon coiled tight scales, overlapping secrets hidden beneath lacquer and jade. So rest your thoughts, here among moonlit courtyards and closed wooden screens. Know that the same empire that built walls high enough to block armies also built families folded inward to guard a throne too heavy to share. Tomorrow more hidden ties will wait behind other gates, but tonight, let the hush of the forbidden rooms ease you deeper into dreams, where emperors whisper only to kin they trust just a little too much. Slip east across the sea, where cherry blossoms drift through spring air like pale confetti. Welcome to Imperial Japan, where cousin marriages and family whispers lingered behind paper doors and wooden palace screens. Here, the imperial house glowed with ancient mystique, its bloodline stretching so far back that myth and genealogy tangled like silk threads in a courtier's sleeve. Step softly into Kyoto's Heian court, where nobles glide across tatami floors in layered silk robes 12 shades deep, each color a season, each pattern a secret code of rank and closeness. Marriage here was not merely about love, but about weaving alliances tight enough to guard a throne said to descend directly from the sun goddess Amaterasu. Sometimes that meant bending bloodlines inward, binding cousins, or closer kin together under moonlit pavilions and whispered vows. Historians still debate how close these imperial pairings truly were. In the Heian era, cousin marriages among aristocrats Kuge were common enough to ensure that power didn't stray from Kyoto's delicate courtyards. Some emperors took wives who were first or second cousins, a convenient way to keep Fujiwara influence at bay, while propping up rival noble houses loyal to the crown. Some scholars argue these ties kept the chrysanthemum throne upright through centuries of clan squabbles and hidden betrayals. Others suspect they also seeded rumors of frailty among heirs who sometimes failed to produce robust lines of succession. Imagine slipping into a moonlit garden behind the Shishenden, the emperor's hall for enthronement ceremonies. Lanterns flicker against ink-black ponds where carp ripple beneath falling petals. Here, a young princess kneels beside her cousin, the prince, his court cap tilted just so his robe edges brushing hers. Their families hover like painted ghosts behind sliding shoji screens, ready to seal the match that keeps their branch strong enough to whisper in imperial ears. One overlooked quirk. While imperial cousin marriages were discreetly noted in official records, later chroniclers, especially during the Edo period, would downplay or smooth over such details to present a purer, more distant myth of the emperor's sacred line. The Meiji Restoration in the 19th century leaned heavily into this myth, promoting the emperor as a distant divine figure, untouched by earthly scandal, even as genealogists kept careful track of who shared whose blood just a few branches up the family tree. Step back through time to the Kamakura shogunate, when real power shifted from cloistered emperors to armored warlords. Even then, the imperial house clung to cousin marriages among noble houses to ensure that any puppet shogun couldn't sever their sacred line completely. Marriages were inked on rice paper scrolls blessed by priests, witnessed by trusted elders who carried these secrets forward through generations. A single record, half buried in temple archives, tells of Emperor Go-Hanazono, who married a cousin to reinforce a fragile claim when rival branches threatened to fracture the line. Some historians remain puzzled by how these unions shaped succession crises that flicker through Japan's medieval chronicles, each name a link in a chain that stretches from Kyoto palaces to distant mountain monasteries. Slip now through Nijo Castle's halls, where sliding screens reveal painted tigers prowling a bamboo grove, symbols of power and watchfulness. Here noble families pressed close to the emperor, offering daughters who were cousins or second cousins gifts to the throne that doubled as leashes for clan ambitions. For the emperor, each cousin bride was a double promise loyalty in the open and complicity behind closed doors. Outside palace walls, common folk rarely glimpse these quiet entanglements. Farmers tending rice paddies in the Kansai mist didn't care which cousin became empress consort, so long as the harvest came. The taxes stayed bearable, and the sun goddess turned her face kindly toward the islands each spring. One curious aside, when Japan's post-war constitution enshrined the emperor as a symbol with no political power, some genealogical threads tugged at old questions. How much of the modern line still carries echoes of these cousin pairings? Historians and geneticists alike pore over imperial archives and DNA studies, wondering where myth ends and hidden kinship still shapes the world's oldest monarchy. You linger in the hush of a palace garden, where nightingales hide among blooming plum trees. A paper lantern sways in the breeze, casting shifting shadows across stones polished by centuries of footsteps. Somewhere beyond the screen doors, the imperial family's secrets sleep as lightly as falling petals, kin tied to kin cousins, bound to cousins, each union a quiet vow to keep the sun goddess's promise alive no matter the cost. So close your eyes under this fragrant bough. Let the whisper of silk and the creak of tatami lull you deeper. The imperial line drifts forward, ancient and quiet binding cousins in gentle shadows, where history breathes like a breeze through paper walls. Tomorrow, there will be more secrets to unfold. Tonight rest, where the lantern's glow flickers softly across 1,000 whispered vows. Now let the scent of plum blossoms fade and drift your thoughts across the savannas and river kingdoms of ancient Africa, where dynasties rose along the Nile's southern stretches and beyond ruling lands rich with gold salt and secrets whispered through griots' songs. Here, too, family lines could loop inward when power demanded a bloodline strong enough to stand against rivals and droughts alike. You find yourself in Cush Nubia's proud kingdom, south of Egypt, yet forever tied to its northern neighbor's tangled royal customs. Stand among the stone pillars of Meroe, where pyramids smaller than Giza's still guard the remains of kings and queens who sometimes ruled side by side, mother with son, sister with brother, cousin with cousin. The royal blood of Cush wasn't simply Egyptian mimicry, it was a tradition shaped by Africa's own rhythms, myths, and matrilineal pride. Some scholars remain divided on how widespread, incestuous, or close kin unions were among Kushite royals. Surviving stelae and tomb inscriptions suggest that royal sisters held power as Candace's queen mothers, who sometimes ruled outright or married within their line to secure succession. It was not always clear whether the queen mother was the biological mother or a sister elevated by custom and ritual. But the effect was the same. The family line circled inward, guarding crowns of gold lapis and authority over river and desert alike. Imagine standing before the tomb of Amanishakheto, one of Meroe's most famous kandakes, whose golden jewelry still dazzles museum glass today. Stories say she may have married within her clan, perhaps even a brother or half-brother, though dusty inscriptions leave more questions than answers. Historians still puzzle over the exact ties, debating whether Greek and Roman travelers exaggerated these practices to paint Africa's queens as exotic or unorthodox by Mediterranean standards. One curious detail unearthed by archaeologists among the royal burial goods: tiny amulets shaped like frogs and cats. Symbols of fertility and rebirth lie close to iron spears and gold rings. These treasures whisper of a kingdom where the line between ruler and deity blurred. A child born of a royal sibling match might be seen not as an abomination, but as a sacred vessel to keep the kingdom's heart beating through famine or invasion. Travel further west, and the echoes shift. Among the Yoruba and Ashanti cousin marriages were woven into noble families' strategies to keep chieftaincies intact. A king's daughter might wed her mother's nephew, knitting clans closer, while ensuring no rival house rose to challenge the ruling stool. Oral histories, carried by griots, storytellers, who preserved lineages like living libraries, speak of rival queens who rose from such tight braids of kinship, wielding titles passed down mother to daughter, cousin to cousin. In the Songhai Empire, merchants whispered rumors of royal families in Gao and Timbuktu, arranging cousin unions to safeguard caravans of salt gold and books drifting across the Sahara's endless dunes. Surviving Arabic chronicles hint at these lineages, but rarely say them plain family bonds, kept hidden behind polite genealogies, inked in Arabic script, guarded by scribes who understood that bloodlines could be both currency and threat. Step deeper into the forests, where Benin's brass plaques shine with stories carved in metal, obas seated among wives and sisters, court nobles leaning close whispers caught in cast bronze forever. Some researchers debate whether the Obus, too, wove cousin marriages among high-ranking families to prevent jealous vassals from claiming royal sons or daughters as convenient pawns. Again, the line between fact and rumor blurs like smoke in an ancestral shrine. What sets these African dynasties apart from the cold marble courts of Europe is how family closeness often fused with matrilineal power. In many kingdoms, a queen mother wielded greater influence than a husband, guiding succession with her clan's voice humming in her ear. If that voice advised her to keep the royal pool tight, the line obeyed even if it meant cousins kneeling side by side at wedding feasts, beneath clay lamps flickering in the tropical dark. Today, griots still recite these names by firelight. Amina, of Zazao, Nana Asma'u, of Sokoto royal women, whose stories shimmer with hints of alliances sealed by kinship closer than Western scribes ever dared record. Modern historians sift folklore and oral genealogies, searching for clarity among praise songs that slip between myth and memory. So stand here a moment longer under the acacia's shade. Listen to the drums echo across a savanna that once knew queens crowned by mothers and guarded by cousin matches no foreign conqueror could untangle overnight. The rivers run red with iron-rich soil and royal secrets alike, secrets that remind you power flows through family, as stubborn and winding as the Niger under moonlight. Let the beat of drums fade into your pulse as your breath slows. There are more sacred kinships ahead, Pacific waves, divine twins, and tales yet to drift into your dreams. But for now, rest here among ancient Africa's dynasty secrets, where gold gleams and blood ties knot tight as woven reeds along the riverbank. Let the African drums quiet in your mind as you follow the wind across the wide Pacific, where turquoise waves crash on coral reefs and ancient chants curl around volcanic slopes. Welcome to the islands of Polynesia, where sacred kinships blurred the line between cousin and spouse chief and sibling ruler and living god. Stand now on a sun-drenched beach in Tahiti or Hawaii, where palm trees lean into the sea breeze and the air tastes of salt and plumeria. Here, genealogy was more than family pride. It was the heartbeat of power. Chiefs or alii ruled not by brute force alone, but by the mana flowing through bloodlines so pure they were protected by taboo or kapu from ordinary touch. Among these island chains, some families sealed their mana by wedding cousins sometimes closer. In Hawaii, you've already glimpsed sacred sibling pairings that birthed the highest-ranking chiefs. But farther afield, on other Pacific islands, cousin marriages and close kin matches created a net of lineage that held islands together across vast stretches of ocean. In Tonga, high-ranking nobles, known as the Tui Kanokupolu, sometimes wove cousin marriages into their strategies, binding rival families into one dynasty that could command dozens of scattered islets. A sister's child might wed a brother's child, sealing alliances while keeping the chiefly line tight enough to hold its spiritual authority. Scholars continue to debate whether these pairings were formal or occasional. Some oral traditions suggest they were both. Imagine slipping through a village at dusk, where thatched fail stand in neat circles and the air hums with ukulele strings. Inside one house, a young chief's daughter is adorned in fine tapa cloth, her hair oiled and scented with gardenia. Her cousin waits beside a kava bowl, elders chanting lineage back to the first canoe that crossed open sea to settle this speck of paradise. For outsiders, the union might look strange, but for islanders, it weaves a genealogy so strong that even rival clans think twice before stirring rebellion. One curious footnote. In Samoa, the chiefly title of Matai passes through careful lines that sometimes doubled back on themselves. Elders weighed bloodlines like fine kava, measuring purity, closeness, and strategic worth before agreeing to a match. Some records hint at cousin pairings so interlocked that genealogies read like braided rope rather than branching trees. Unlike Egypt's stone-carved boasts, or China's careful court scribes, Polynesia's secrets live mostly in memory and chant. Genealogists, titled keepers of family lines, memorize thousands of names, reciting them at gatherings to prove a chief's right to stand above the common folk. Each name, a bead on a necklace that, once broken, could scatter a clan's mana like driftwood on the tide. Peer into the past, and you find Kamehameha. Again, his conquest of the Hawaiian Islands wasn't just won by warfare, but by bloodlines carefully managed through sacred unions. His successors guarded that legacy with cousin marriages woven through the ruling Ali'i class for generations, a shield against foreign threats and internal dissent alike. Step now onto a canoe carved from breadfruit wood. Paddle through star-flecked night to the Marquesas, where island myths speak of brother-sister ancestors birthing the first chiefs. Here, the echoes of divine twins rule the oral histories, siblings so sacred that their pairing in legend set a precedent for chiefly unions centuries later. Some anthropologists still debate whether these tales reflected actual practice or served as mythic permission for the rare marriage that joined sacred bloodlines when the ocean's isolation left few noble matches. One detail: Western missionaries scribbled into journals, often with wide eyes and scandalized notes, was how islanders spoke of these unions without shame. To them, mana mattered more than moral rules imported from faraway churches. A chief's closeness to the gods depended on the unbroken line of descent, even if that line coiled back on itself like a woven lei. Outside the chieftain's fail, commoners farmed taro in wet paddies, fished lagoon shallows, and offered tribute in woven mats and smoked fish. They did not question who the chief married, only whether the chief's mana was strong enough to calm storms, command fish shoals, and bless their children's crops. Modern researchers pore over these chants and whispered lineages, wondering where truth ends and legend carries on. Some oral genealogies still hush certain names, coded reminders that once a cousin might have been more than a cousin, and the village's luck depended on that secret staying safe in the family's song. So lie back now, under coconut fronds, and watch the stars shimmer like ancient canoes sailing the Milky Way. Know that on these scattered islands, bloodlines and ocean paths share one truth. They are both fragile and unbreakable, bound by faith in ancestors and the hush of waves against coral. Rest easy, knowing these sacred kinships cradle stories, yet to wash ashore, waiting to drift through your dreams like soft surf under moonlight. Leave behind the warm surf of Polynesia and follow whispers back to dusty myth, where marble temples and ancient scrolls guard tales of royal twins, divine mortal, or somewhere in between, whose bond defied ordinary family ties. Across cultures, the myth of twins ruling together sometimes as lovers lingers like candle smoke in half-forgotten shrines. You stand now in the shadow of Delphi's sacred stones, where Greek priests once whispered riddles to trembling kings. The Greeks spun tales of twins born of gods and mortal women. Apollo and Artemis, sunlight and moonlight intertwined in a dance so close that later poets tiptoed around the question, how close did they really stand? Though no record outright marries them, older fragments hint at rituals echoing older, darker unions, siblings bound in myth to ensure the balance of night and day, hunt and harvest. Some scholars argue it's reading too much into symbolism. Others find traces in votive offerings that suggest the idea never fully vanished from temple steps. Step north now to the myths of the Inca. In the high Andes, twin siblings often anchor stories of empires founding. Manco Capac and Mama Oclo, brother and sister, sent by the sun god Inti to civilize the highland people, are depicted in old chronicles as husband and wife, a divine pair meant to model perfect rule. Scholars still puzzle whether this union was purely mythic or reflected real Inca royal customs. Some hint that early rulers mirrored the legend marrying sisters to echo the sun god's will. A curious detail rarely told in textbooks, some surviving Andean textiles depict the twin founders with intertwined snakes at their feet. A subtle symbol, scholars believe nods to fertility and the coiling bond of blood that blurs the border between kin and consort. The Spanish chroniclers recoiled at the idea, yet Inca nobles once wove these myths into the fabric of their rule, justifying power as divine inheritance flowing through sacred sibling lines. Travel east, now past the Ganges River's ancient bends, where Hindu epics cradle another echo. Yama and Yami twins in Vedic texts dance between life and death, brother and sister bound by cosmic duty. While the Rig Veda doesn't outright name them as lovers, its oldest hymns carry verses so layered with metaphor that later priests carefully tuck them away. Some scholars insist the union was spiritual only. Others find older oral hints that ritual pairing once symbolized fertility rites, too close for comfort by modern standards. You step through jungle vines to ancient Cambodian temples, where carvings of divine twins appear in Apsara, dances graceful figures who spin and bow, echoing lost stories of kingly pairs who claim descent from sibling gods. Researchers still debate if these carvings represent myth or veiled memory of royal twins who might have ruled together, their closeness mirrored in the court's careful alliances. One curious fragment comes from the Yoruba of West Africa, where twins Ibeji are seen as both blessing and burden. While not lovers in these myths, their spiritual connection is so profound that to lose one means caring for the spirit through ritual dolls, dressed, fed, and spoken to as if still alive. Though cousin marriage among Yoruba nobles is well documented, twin unions fade into taboo, yet the stories linger hinting that once spiritual twinship shaped royal identity more deeply than any church scribe dared note. You stand now in a quiet hall lined with books that smell of old glue and papyrus. Scholars pore over footnotes in dusty volumes. Some dismiss divine twin unions as fanciful echoes of fertility rites. Others whisper that in the deepest layers of myth, humanity tucked away truths too uncomfortable to carve into public stone. There's no scholarly consensus, only the hush of speculation, the flicker of possibility that behind every twin crown lies a bond closer than legend will admit. Outside these dusty archives, the world spun on farmers planted rice under moonlit twins, sailors charted stars named Castor, and Pollux storytellers spun tales of sibling pairs who defied gods and mortals alike. Even now, twins glimmer on flags, temple walls, and star maps, quiet reminders that power and taboo often twine tighter than family trees dare to show. So close your eyes under the stone lintel of some forgotten temple where ivy climbs pillars carved with twin serpents and broken gods. Let the myths curl around your thoughts like incense drifting into sleep. Whether truth or tale, divine twins still stand. Watch two shadows, two crowns, one secret pulse of closeness that history half remembers in half hides in dusty corners of forgotten shrines. Slip away from crumbling temples and twin crowns into the hushed chapels and smoky altars where kings and priests alike turn to faith for answers and justifications. If royal unions twisted too close for comfort, holy texts and rituals often stepped in to wrap the uncomfortable in the soft veil of divine blessing. Across the world, religion did not always condemn these tangled bloodlines. Sometimes it quietly blessed them. Step first into ancient Egypt again, where the pharaoh wasn't merely king. He was Horus, living Osiris, reborn a god among mortals. How better to guard that godhood than by keeping royal blood so pure that only a sister could bear the next divine ruler? Priests recorded these unions as cosmic duty, mirroring the sacred pairing of Isis and Osiris, brother and sister, husband and wife. Their myth explained why pharaohs should do the same to rule like the gods. One must live as the gods did. Some historians still argue whether Egyptian religion simply reflected older customs, or if priests actively encouraged these pairings to protect their own influence. Surviving temple inscriptions hint that rituals surrounding royal weddings blurred lines between spiritual and physical union, incense chants and offerings weaving taboo into sacred order. Move forward to Zoroastrian Persia, where a more overt religious command once flickered across sacred fire altars. Kvaidvadatha, next of kin marriage, was not just permitted by some priests, but described in ancient Avesta texts as meritorious, a cosmic way to strengthen purity and defy the demonic chaos always lurking at the world's edge. Marrying close kin was believed to guard righteousness, an echo of primordial unions between the first humans in Zoroastrian myth. Yet, like desert wind, erasing caravan tracks, these practices faded or retreated into hushed disapproval when new rulers arrived. Greek chroniclers gleefully branded Persians decadent, though some modern scholars still debate how common such unions truly were outside the priesthood's sacred stories. Now you drift east to South Asia, where Hindu scriptures spin tales dense with paradox. The Vedas and Puranas offer both cautionary whispers and subtle permissions. Some dynasties justified cousin marriages through complex caste rules and ancient precedents, ritual purity, wrapped in Vedic chants that blurred the line between custom and taboo. Royal genealogies sometimes looped inward under the shelter of Dharma, while wandering priests debated how close was too close, each school spinning its own interpretations into fragile threads of logic. Travel to medieval Europe, where the Christian Church held the power to condemn or condone a marriage with a single Latin decree. Royal cousins, often first cousins, wed under papal dispensations. Written in candlelit script, stamped with red wax, that turned taboo into political strategy. The Habsburgs, that famously chin-heavy family, leaned heavily on papal blessing to marry cousins generation after generation, keeping empires stitched together from Spain to Austria under the gentle eye of Rome's scribes. One curious detail: medieval bishops charged hefty fees for these dispensations. The closer the kin, the larger the sum. Some kingdoms practically bankrolled cathedral roofs, with silver coins paid to bless unions that common villagers might have whispered about in scandal. Was it holy necessity, pragmatic fundraising, or both? Historians still argue across heavy folios, but the stone spires of Europe's cathedrals stand quiet testimony to this marriage of faith and blood. Look beyond Europe to the Pacific once more, where Polynesian priests blessed cousin unions under the vast night sky. Ritual chants frame these matches not as sin, but as duty mana bound tighter with every cousin's vow, the divine spark within the chief's line shining a little brighter under the gods' approving gaze. Missionaries arriving centuries later called it sinful. The island's old prayers only smiled and rolled on with the surf. Religion did not merely forgive forbidden closeness. It could sanctify it, binding taboo to altar and throne alike. Some scholars still dig through temple ruins and half-burned scrolls looking for a single clear answer. Did faith excuse what blood alone could not? Or did it simply name old instincts holy so that power could endure behind stained glass temple gates and hush-hush papal letters? You stand now among cold stone pews and flickering candles, each flame a question in the dark. One empire's sin was another's blessing. One generation's scandal, another's divine plan. Across continents and centuries, religion offered the same promise: what is hidden by flesh can be made pure by prayer, so long as the crown stays firmly on a single family's brow. Rest now beneath this hush of hymns and incense. Let the soft shadows remind you that faith is a cloak woven in sacred words, stitched in whispered prayers that can hide secrets just as well as it reveals them. In your dreams tonight, the same chants will echo: power must survive, and sometimes so must forbidden love. Let the chapel hush fade as you drift toward cold, empty corridors, where silence carries the ghostly echo of footsteps that never came. Thrones left vacant crowns heavy with dust and lineages that folded inward until they snapped like brittle parchment. Royal inbreeding did not always preserve power. Sometimes it choked it to death. Imagine stepping into a dim Habsburg hall in Vienna, candlelight flickering off portraits of kings and queens who all wear the same nose, the same jawline that juts too far, the same eyes drooping under the weight of centuries of cousin marriages. Here, bloodline purity was an iron obsession, an empire stitched together by uncles marrying nieces, cousins joining cousins, until the family tree circled like a snake devouring its own tail. One curious detail that lingers in medical journals, the so-called Habsburg jaw, that distinct prognathism, became both symbol and symptom of a dynasty so tightly interwoven that genetic quirks turned into royal trademarks. Charles II of Spain, last of his line, was said to be so physically frail and mentally burdened that he could barely chew his food or rule his court. Historians still debate whether his tragic condition alone doomed an empire or merely crowned centuries of political missteps. Either way, the palace's echoing chambers remind you that no blessing of church or claim of divine right could shield a bloodline when it twisted too far inward. Travel eastward to the Ptolemies again. Cleopatra's tangled branch was not the only one to wilt under the weight of close-kin unions. Earlier generations saw siblings wed so often that assassinations and poisonings became common solutions when incest alone failed to produce an heir strong enough to hold the throne. One ruler's sickly son was another's convenient stepping stone. Some scholars argue the dynasty's end was sealed as much by Rome's ambition as by its own inability to produce heirs healthy enough to stand before the Senate's blades. Step softly through the corridors of ancient Persia, where the Achaemenids too watched their line flicker. Cousin marriages and whispered sister pairings may have strengthened royal authority for a time, but dynastic squabbles and fragile heirs opened cracks that Alexander the Great's armies widened with every step across the empire's ancient stone roads. One dusty tablet hints at rival princes squabbling for the throne after Darius III, each claiming the purest line, only to lose everything to a Macedonian boy king, whose parents ironically married well outside the family tree. Not all stories of heirless thrones come from marble palaces or golden sarcophagi. Imagine a small Pacific island chiefdom, where the last Ali of a high rank dies childless, no cousin to wed, no sister wife to bear a child with enough mana to claim the title. The village elders gather under breadfruit trees, reciting genealogies from memory, trying to find a distant cousin's child to prop up as heir. When they fail, the title drifts, like driftwood out to sea, another royal secret swallowed by salt and waves. In medieval Europe, even kingdoms that shunned overt incest fell prey to its softer cousin-cousin marriage, repeated so often that blood ties grew tighter with every generation. Spanish Habsburgs, Austrian branches, English cousins, each match sealed for alliance's sake, each child born with a roll of the dice that sometimes came up empty. The result? Wars of succession that left empty thrones and battlefields stained with more than royal blood. One overlooked detail: when a line failed, churches and courts scrambled to rewrite the rules. Adoption, sudden new heirs discovered in far-flung branches, or foreign royals brought in to marry a last daughter, all desperate attempts to patch holes left by unions that proved too close for nature to forgive. Some researchers remain puzzled at how often history's grand collapses were less about swords and more about the silent sabotage of genes passed too many times through the same veins. Step now into a ruined castle in Eastern Europe. Ivy coils over crumbling stone walls, the wind whispering through broken towers. Here, a local legend says a once mighty noble line ended when its last heir, a boy born pale and sickly, withered away before he could marry his equally pale cousin. The villagers still point to a cracked marble bust in the old chapel, the eyes hollow, where candlelight flickers on winter nights. These thrones, empty and echoing, remind you of a simple truth. Bloodlines that cling too tightly to themselves may stay pure, but they rarely stay strong. Some kings learn too late that a crown guarded by cousins alone can rust as easily as it glitters. So let your thoughts drift through these quiet ruins. Listen to the hush, where laughter, intrigue, and whispered vows once danced behind heavy doors. In this silence, the ghosts of heirless thrones teach a final lesson. Power needs fresh roots to bloom, not just closed circles to suffocate within stone walls and silver crowns. Rest now in the echo of kingdoms undone by their own tight embrace. Step out from those hollow halls where empty crowns gather dust and wander into the humid edge of a jungle, clearing somewhere a European flag flaps on a lonely outpost, and two worlds meet in a clash of customs neither side fully understands. Colonial encounters brought a new lens to royal unions outside Europe, turning sacred kinships into scandalous tales told through missionary letters and explorers' diaries. Picture an early Spanish friar standing awkwardly in a Hawaiian alii courtyard, horrified to learn that the high chief has married his sister to preserve sacred mana. To the alii, it was normal, divinely ordained by ancestors and kapu codes. To the friar ink scratching across parchment in his humid quarters, it was sin incarnate proof. These islanders needed salvation schools and marriage laws that matched European sensibilities. One curious footnote: many colonial powers didn't just judge, they documented, often with a blend of fascination and disdain. In the British Raj, English civil servants scribbled reports about rumored cousin marriages among Mughal descendants, or princely states where close kin unions still flickered under colonial radar. They called these Oriental degeneracies, ignoring that back home, Europe's royal houses signed cousin marriage contracts under church seals just as often. Stand now on the grassy plains near the great Zimbabwe ruins, where Portuguese traders once traded beads and cloth for gold and ivory. They carried back stories of African dynasties whose queens wielded power through cousin lines or sister ties the traders found unnatural. Some records paint these kingdoms as exotic curiosities, strange mirror images of Europe's own hidden bloodlines conveniently twisted into tales of backwardness to justify conquest. In Mexico, Spanish priests chronicled the Aztec practice of keeping noble lines tight through cousin unions, sometimes misreading poetic titles as literal incest. One monk, his letters now fragile in a cathedral archive, wrote that Moctezuma's daughters were taken as gifts by Cortes, missing the layers of consent alliance and cultural context that made these unions more complex than a scandalous rumor. Colonial administrators in Polynesia penned reports dripping with moral outrage at alii practices, failing to grasp that these forbidden pairings were cornerstones of island rule long before foreign flags rose on coral beaches. Some chiefs even used the confusion to their advantage, signing treaties, negotiating trade deals, and quietly weaving new kinships behind the missionaries' backs, preserving a bit of mana under the blanket of European confusion. Step closer to the French courts during their time in Indochina. Here, colonial scribes wrote about Vietnamese mandarins arranging close kin unions among noble clans, framing them as proof of decadence. Yet they ignored their own aristocrats, who once did the same in candlelit palaces back in Paris. This double standard painted non-European customs as savage echoes of an older Europe that colonizers pretended they'd evolved beyond. One overlooked quirk: while colonial records condemned these unions, they also kept them alive in secret. British and French anthropologists cataloged genealogies with the same curiosity they gave to butterflies and bird specimens, an obsessive cataloging that ensured stories of royal incest, real or rumored, survived in libraries long after empires fell. Some scholars argue colonial powers sometimes exaggerated or invented incest claims to weaken local rulers' moral authority. If a queen was rumored to have wed her brother, missionaries could brand her people primitive, the perfect excuse to install new laws, ban old rituals, and rewrite the next generation's textbooks. The truth of whether the union was real often vanished beneath layers of translation rumor and the rustling pages of reports filed away in London or Madrid. You stand now in the echo of these outposts, an abandoned mission house in Hawaii, an old Raj bungalow in India, a stone church on a Tahitian beach. Vines creep through broken shutters. The wind rattles paper pages still stuffed in moldy trunks. These records, half gossip, half fact, remind you that conquest rarely brought clarity. It layered confusion on ancient kinships that had survived centuries without a European priest to declare them forbidden. Outside, life carried on. Island canoes still skimmed turquoise lagoons. African griots still sang lineages under baobab trees. Aztec airs still whispered family ties into the hush of Catholic masses. Forbidden by colonial law, but kept alive in memory, another echo that outlived the muskets, crosses, and flags. So breathe out the dust of these colonial files. Let the jungle reclaim missionary walls. Let waves erase ship logs that called sacred unions savage. In these gaps between what they wrote and what the people lived, old kinships drift on quiet reminders that power, love, and taboo rarely fit neatly in a foreign ledger. Rest here at the edge of a clearing, where past and present hum together like wind through palm leaves, stories waiting for you to dream them back into life. Now let the hush of colonial chapels and jungle outposts drift away as you step into the bright, humming laboratories and DNA archives of today, where the ancient whispers of royal incest, sacred cousin pairings, and taboo unions echo through genetic code, waiting to be decoded under cold, fluorescent lights. What do we find centuries later when modern science peels back the layers of rumor myth and carved stone? Picture a team of geneticists hunched over a sequencer strands of royal mummies' DNA coiled in glass vials. In Egypt, researchers have pried secrets from the bones of pharaohs long hidden behind gold masks. Studies of Tutankhamun's fragile remains revealed a family tree tangled enough to surprise even seasoned historians, likely born to siblings. The boy king's lineage preserved divine blood and fragile health. His clubfoot, his cleft palate, the hints of disease, genetic echoes of a family too tightly looped the price of becoming living gods. Shift your gaze to Europe's marble corridors. For centuries, the Habsburg chin was a whispered joke in royal courts. Now it's a genetic case study in how repeated cousin marriages compact tiny genetic flaws into tragic shapes. Modern scientists have traced this jawline's rise and fall like a cautionary tale carved in bone. One study found that in the last Spanish Habsburgs, the inbreeding coefficient rivaled that of a child born to sibling parents, today a measure of just how far a royal family could push nature's limits before nature quietly pushed back. Travel east to Japan, where the chrysanthemum throne's ancient genealogies once glowed with stories of cousin unions under paper screens. Today, the imperial family's bloodline is one of the most carefully documented in the world. Yet geneticists quietly debate how much those old closenesses linger in the DNA passed to modern heirs. Official records are sparse, but the questions drift in scholarly journals, subtle as incense in a wooden temple hall. In Polynesia, geneticists collecting oral genealogies and cheek swabs hope to map how old cousin pairings shape today's island communities. The word incest rarely appears in these studies. Instead, researchers speak of endogamy, the practice of marrying within a limited group. Among the Hawaiian Ali'i descendants and other Pacific nobles, DNA sometimes holds tiny markers, echoing the sacred unions once blessed by chance under starlit coconut groves. One curious detail that flickers through scientific papers, modern genetic tools, are rewriting the gossip of colonial diaries and half-finished missionary reports, where priests claimed scandal. Some DNA studies find only ordinary cousin unions common to countless rural villages worldwide. Where rumor said sibling double-checking often finds a cousin once removed a niece by alliance, proof that gossip twists as easily as bloodlines. Yet the science does not just confirm old myths. It hums with cautionary notes for the future. Modern medicine quietly points to the risks once hidden behind stone walls and temple gates. From royal palaces to tiny mountain villages, repeated close-kin marriages can sharpen rare disorders like knives. Some communities still carrying the genetic echoes of royal customs now face difficult questions. How do you honor ancestors' sacred unions without passing on the shadows they left in fragile bones and blood? And yet, beyond the clinical facts, science also finds something unexpectedly human in these hidden threads. The same genome that reveals the risks of closed bloodlines also proves how far people would go to keep power, faith, and identity alive. A royal dynasty's secret pairing, once whispered behind silk screens, now rests in double helixes, charted with quiet respect by geneticists who know the story isn't just scandal, it's survival, ambition, belief, and the deep fear of losing a name to history's hungry wind. Step softly back from the lab bench. Now your thoughts, echoing with ancient names, turned into sequences of ATG and C. Tutankhamun's bones, Habsburg jaws, Ali chants, Ptolemaic whispers each story, once buried in tombs and temple walls, now glows under microscopes, not to shame the dead, but to remind the living what closeness can cost when power curls too tight around a crown. So rest your eyes here among test tubes and flickering screens. Know that the forbidden loves of Pharaoh's kings, chiefs, and emperors live on not as scandal, but as strands of memory, humming in your own bloodstream. Proof that history's secrets never truly die. They shift, they echo, they drift forward, like old lullabies waiting to be heard again, just as you drift now into sleep, carrying these tangled royal dreams into the quiet dark. Breathe out now and feel the hush settle over every corner of your thoughts. The pyramids stand silent, the palaces dark, the ancient temples sealed behind drifting sands. Let the royal chambers and forbidden vows fade to soft echoes as your mind drifts far from scandal and secrets. Imagine moonlight touching stone walls that crumble gently back into the earth, crowned heads laid to rest where no gossip or priest or curious scholar can wake them. May your dreams drift easy tonight, carrying you past these tangled bloodlines and heavy crowns into a quiet realm where no throne needs guarding and no family tree folds back on itself. If you'd like to wander through more lost empires and sleepy histories, you know where to find me, quiet as ever, waiting to whisper old tales in the dark. Sweet dreams, fellow historian.